a retired homicide detective. I've interviewed thousands of people, from serial killers to ministers. Welcome to the interview room. Welcome to the interview room, everybody. On New Year's Eve. Dr. Brucato in the house. They're playing my music. Oh my gosh. We have a fun, great show for you tonight. A little crazy, but it's going to be fun. Dr. B, welcome. Welcome. Dr. B, if you do not know him, he is the author of this amazing book, The New Evil. He is the author of one of the largest research, actually it is the largest research on mass murder in the United States, with over 119 years of data.
In the world.
In the world. Yeah, in the world. And also, that's why tonight is going to be such a super cool show, because we're going to talk about a lot of crazy things tonight. Perfect timing on New Year's. Perfect timing. Hopefully going into 2024, it'll be a much better year. But until then, we get to talk about the new evil and Dr. Brucato. And also, if you have not, if you're in the Manhattan area, you can go see him. He takes patients. So go look up Dr. Gary Brucato in Manhattan. So, question for you, Doc. With the New Year's upon us, that kind of sets things into motion sometimes for various people, right?
Well, the holidays generally can be very difficult for people because they can be very symbolic. You know, there's something about this, them emblematizing the end of a year and the beginning of a new one, that can, for some people, I think, of a certain turn of mind, give them a sense of, like, you know, tearing out an old page and starting a new one, and making resolutions, and you know, renewal with the spring event, you know, coming soon and all that. But for some people, it's really more about taking stock of their lives and what it's been like, and that can make some people feel very negatively if they're not happy with where they are. But it can also be a very lonely time, because the holidays are associated with gathering with friends and all that. And New Year's also has a way of really calling to mind, you know, Auld Lang Syne, really calling to mind the people we've lost. It's very difficult if you've ever lost somebody, which is a theme that comes up often on the program. But if you've ever lost somebody, you know how painful the holidays can be. You know, you think of A Christmas Carol, you know, with the empty chair where Tiny Tim once sat. So that's sort of a thing. And New Year's can be especially sad for some people. And then, of course, there are the dangers of the holiday, right? People intoxicated, you know, driving around like that, you know, gatherings where, you know, it's very late at night and you leave late at night, and you may be in a neighborhood where it isn't a great idea, particularly if you're compromised. And, you know, you see this stuff goes on. And for certain designing persons out there that are unhappy about, let's say, you know, the American way of life or certain things like that, these kind of large scale days can also be targets.
Yeah, they become potentially could become soft targets for sure. Soft targets.
So it's a lot of mixed feelings depending upon where you are and how you feel. But I encourage everybody to try to take the more positive view. But this theme that we're talking about, Chris, part of the reason I'm giving such a long answer is that it's actually foreshadowing a lot of what we're going to talk about in the show. So I sort of laid that out, and I will reference that little preamble.
Do you like the way I set this thumbnail up? I put your book up on a stick. And then I have Dr. Burgess's book over on the left. Then I've got Eve. Then I've got Buddy. Somebody holding Buddy up in the background.
Oh, it gives the impression that these people are like venerating these things like they are manifestos, but of course that's not
no.
But it gives that impression,
That's hysterical. So when Dr. Brucato and I were talking, and by the way, tell everybody about this picture and how important this picture is to you.
Well, of course, those of you who are repeat viewers or have read The New Evil are familiar with my very close relationship with my mentor, Michael Stone, who passed away earlier this month. And this picture was taken when we were filming for a series called Serial Psyche, which actually was a fantastic series. For whatever reason, it's hard to find. But I was sort of consulting on the show, and I suggested they do an episode on each subtype of serial killer. And this photo was taken when Michael and I appeared on the episode on serial sexual homicide. And what happened was the director, Rob Kirk, who's really terrific, he was an Emmy winner and everything. He got such a charge out of just letting the camera run with the two of us chatting. And, he winds up with this long footage. I wish I could get my hands on it of Michael and me just kind of chatting away about the motivations of these kind of serial killers. And Michael, of course, as always, is spewing horrifying facts, matter-of-factly, and I'm sort of basking in how brilliant he is, and so it was really a very powerful moment. I remember it like it was yesterday, and so I love that picture. I'm glad you have it.
Well, I'm glad to, and just honored to put it up there. I really am, because I know how much of an impact he had on your career as well as your friendship. The two of you were two peas in a pod, and I can only imagine what those conversations, how deep they could get. And because he really was an amazing, brilliant.
A lot of the ideas that people hear, that I have here on the show, a lot of them really come out of the teachings of my mentors. I had wonderful mentors. I mean, and then of course formulated a lot of ideas on my own, and they kind of saw me as somebody that was carrying on their work, particularly Michael, whose library and other things I've inherited with the urging to carry on the work. As a matter of fact, last night I went to go visit his widow, and his wife, and she offered me the necktie that he happens to be wearing in the because she has all his neckties, and said, "Do you want any of these?" And I have a very visual memory. I recognized that was the one that he had worn that day, so I got a kick out of that. But anyway, so it's weird to see.
Well, everybody, if you're new with us tonight, we only ask one thing: is that you subscribe to this channel, as well as hit the thumbs up button, like everybody else asks on YouTube. I mean, it helps move the work forward, and it also helps us help other families and talk to them. Well, so Dr. Brucato and I were talking at length, and he suggested, let's do a show on manifestos. And one of the catalysts to that, obviously, was not just the fact that Elliot, Zodiac, and Unabomber, but and of course all his Dr. Brucato's studies and research. But I had a personal experience from a family's position in Las Vegas, as everybody knows, recently, involving my son. And that individual, Mr. Anthony Polito, ended up writing a manifesto that Dr. Brucato has, digested and analyzed quite deeply. And so, the fact that I had an experience as a family with an active shooter. This story tonight's not going to be about active shooters as a whole. It's going to be about those. I don't know. What's the best way to describe how we're going to talk about this tonight? What's the best way?
Well, the common denominator and the people we're going to talk about is that in addition to their seething hatred and grudges against certain groups, had a kind of graphomania. They couldn't help but endlessly write about whatever it is that was bothering them or upsetting them, and so that the connecting factor with all of them was that each of them saw himself as a kind of deliverer of justice against a certain group toward which he had a grievance. And he couldn't just take himself out or go out like that. It had to be, with a lot of spite and kind of the slight exception we'll see is Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, because as we'll see with him, there was a mission that was really more about the environment and these kinds of ideas. But I still think underneath that there was a little bit of of the typical serial killer motivation, just a little more buried underneath. But I think it's going to be a fascinating discussion and very personal. I think as you kind of lay out what happened with the Vegas shooting. I mean, it's such a remarkable story, so disturbing. I'll never forget the day you called me to tell me that your son had been involved. But I don't know how much you want to lay out for the audience.
Yeah. So that day, my oldest son, who is the chair of the economics department at UNLV, he was in his office. He went down to the fourth floor to speak with somebody, and while he was on one side of the building, the Mr. Polito walked up the stairwell and came in the opposite hallway where my son was. And my son had talked to some people, and he walked over towards the elevator. And as he stepped on the elevator, he was going to go downstairs to the student center. And for some reason, the student who stepped off the elevator on the fourth floor had it already pushed for the fifth floor where his office is. And the elevator went up instead of going down. While he was on the elevator, less than probably 30 seconds, 40 seconds, they estimated, the shooter started to shoot. And Ian gets off of the elevator. His colleague, they hear the gunfire going off below them on the fourth floor. They're on the fifth floor. And they immediately, a cop's son, he goes into full, panic mode in terms of let's get some things moving. And he hustles 8 staff members into his office. He's got the biggest office on that particular floor. And they barricade themselves in the office. When the suspect had gone downstairs to the third floor, that's where he kills 2 people. He had killed one on the fourth floor. And then he takes the elevator up to the fifth floor. And as he gets off the elevator, he runs into the gentleman who's been shot. They're not releasing his name yet. And he is still in ICU. But then the suspect goes to my son's office and tries to breach his office, kicks his office door in. I start getting text messages from my son saying, hey, the guy's trying to get into my office. My daughter's calling him. I ended up calling him and talking to him while the shooter was still in the building. And you can hear the fire alarm going off. And long story short, the suspect goes over across the hallway, the opposite hall, and shoots through the door of the other chair's office on that floor. Why he didn't shoot through my son's door where those other 8 people were with him is divine intervention, in my opinion. I mean, the Lord protected him that day. And so that's just my opinion, on this New Year's Day, and that's my belief system. That said, the suspect goes to the elevator, goes down to the first floor, and he starts exiting out into the courtyard. And that's when he's confronted by the two Las Vegas PD officers from the university there. One of them being, as the universe is on schedule, you can't make this stuff up, was an old friend of mine by the name of Damian Garcia, who used to be a Carlsbad police officer in Southern California. And he was a dog handler, and he knew my son. But he didn't know, they didn't know each other, that they were working at the university, you know, one as a cop and one in the economics department. So anyway, by divine intervention, again, those officers engaged that suspect and ended up, you know, neutralizing the threat. And that ended up being this Dr. Anthony Polito, who wrote this diatribe of threats to staff and university and other, you know, professors around, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And so Dr. Brucato and I started talking about it, and he started reading about this guy. And I know you can't really see his manifesto here, but Dr. Brucato can break it down. I mean, this guy is like really mad, and he had a hit list of 9 people. Fortunately, none of those 9 people were killed, thank God. But he was, you know, just a raving lunatic. Well, I don't want to describe him like that. This is where you come in, Dr. Brucato. I mean, would tell us what your assessment of him based on your study of him so far.
Well, oh, am I getting a little echo? Okay. Well, first of all, when we did the database at Columbia, I created a motivational system to try to capture what was really the chief underlying motive, according to published reports, legal documents, whatever we can get our hands on. And what we found was that only a tiny fragment of people who commit mass murder, attempted, or, you know, but really complete mass murder is what we were looking at. Only a tiny fragment are severely mentally ill, you know, psychotic or so forth. The vast majority of them are people where there is a precipitating event, usually something that wipes away the person's sense of purpose, identity, you know, a job that they want and can't get, you know, losing a job that they've had, a complaint is made against them and they're thrown out of school, which has shades of the Koberger story, by the way, which, you know, is an accused, that's the person accused of mass murder. We had a similar trigger, right, with the TA position. There's that kind of event that makes the person feel, I don't have what everybody else has, and then some of them think I'm kind of a loser, you know, there's no reason for me to be alive, but they're bitter and they feel that you shouldn't have what they can't have. And other people don't have enough insight to know that they're doing anything wrong or weirding people out or acting aggressively or whatever, and they can scheme and plot for maximum pain on their way out, right? Or just as an expression of fury. And what happens with some of those, the ones who are a little more grudgy, a little more angry at baseline, is that's where we tend to see a lot of the writing, the ones that really want the world to know how furious they are. And they see it as a kind of mission to level the playing field on, you know, either on their way out, or you know, in a blaze where that they think somehow they're going to get away with, or even if they get captured, they'll be proud of what they did, you know, that kind of thing. And you can also see a lot of the manifesto writing in that small group of more psychotic individuals. For example, Ted Kaczynski was a paranoid schizophrenic, who was a person who had an obsession with the environment and did a lot of meticulous writing about the subject in a way that suggested like what we call a monomania, where a person is just completely and totally fixated on a topic, right? And there are people like that that are not psychotic, but when a person has psychosis with that kind of monomania, it can take on an almost delusional quality that you're in an army of people that are fighting for this cause or whatever. And that can have very racist tones. It can be some scientific thing you believe in, some cause, whatever, misogyny. So the key to this, to all this, is two things. One, it's not really about severe mental illness. It's more about aberrant personality traits, weak coping skills, not having, anybody that you can kind of lean on to kind of help you with those feelings because you don't know how to process them, feeling isolated, and then either exploding impulsively, or if you're a little more narcissistic or psychopathic, waiting a little while and then plotting and scheming something that has a really awful quality to it. And that's more what you saw here in the Polito case. So Polito was clearly an angry person. But what's very interesting is that when the stories started to come out about him, he was a professor, very bright man. But one of the things I predicted on your show that I was really laughing at how accurate it turned out to be. I mean, I'm not laughing as in it's funny, just amazed at how, because we chatted about it and then it came out in the news that I had predicted that his students were going to say that whatever topic he talked about, the conversation would meander to him.
Yeah, no, I remember.
And word for word, that's what they said. They said he'd be teaching, and the next thing you know, he's talking about himself, his life, his vacation, or whatever. So that you had this person who really was getting up there, and instead of seeing himself as an educator, right? You remember the word educate comes from the Latin educare, to lead out. So the idea is something is in the person, and your job is simply to pull it out of them. This is a person who was more interested in what we would call inducating, right? Inducare, to stick into a person, into their head, some idea that you have about yourself or the world that you that you would rather them feel rather than care about their own identity or their interests. And that's very much the way he was. And what happened is he was getting turned down all over the place for jobs. So here we have the precipitating event, and you have to imagine this totally arrogant guy that thinks you'd be lucky to have me, and I can't find work, right? So he's fuming, and he starts sending white powder to a whole bunch of people with these writings, these absolutely vile writings. I mean, I don't even think we could quote them because they were just hideous. And what he would do is he would find, he would identify what he saw as weaknesses in the individual that he was targeting, and he would pick at them, their physical appearance, their age, his sense of their intelligence level, whatever, and he would mock them because it tells you something about how he felt about himself, that he was not being given a job because he was not good enough or whatever. Consistent with this kind of I know better than everybody personality that he had, he was absolutely obsessed with the Zodiac killer, who was another I know better than you do personality.
Who we're going to talk about.
We're going to talk about, yes, is one of my favorite cases. I know everything about it. And it's interesting, I mean, except, of course, who he was, because no one does. And this guy thought that he had cracked part of a code, one of these completely impenetrable codes that the Zodiac had written. He thought that he figured out that the bottom of one of the ciphers spelled out the name of Arthur Lee Allen, who was a suspect that David Fincher made a movie about, Zodiac, with Jake Gyllenhaal and Mark Ruffalo and a bunch of other people. And so he was really fixated on the idea that he could now find proof of Arthur Lee Allen being the culprit in that cipher. And he wrote this endless document where he laid out what he thought was this absolutely brilliant proof that Zodiac was indeed this man. And so you had this kind of over-identification. It was a way of saying, you think you're the smartest, I'm even smarter than you are, right? Because I cracked your code, that kind of thing. And then imagine that guy being rejected and nobody cares about his theory. I mean, he was just simply not going to take that, right?
You stop. I got to stop you for 30 seconds. I love this comment. If anybody knows how to get Dr. Brucato a TED Talk, let's hook him up. That is Amy in Boston. That is a brilliant idea. you know, he would just kill it. I mean, no pun intended. He would abs on this New Year's Eve, right? Tonight we're going to have some fun because you're going to be able to get Dr. B's, attention tonight because he's going to answer questions. And if you're new with us tonight, you're very lucky because we've got the author here of The New Evil, Dr. Brucato, and his bios down in the links here. But if you've never been to our channel, tonight is a good night to be here because he's going to break down Elliot Rodger's like nobody I've ever seen because I've heard it. Number one, he's going to he's breaking this guy down if you can't tell. But I love this comment. I'm sorry, I did not mean to throw you off your skis there for a moment, but I know you like a book. And anybody who has a contact with Ted, let's get him a TED Talk. Anne and Dr. Brucato would also be another amazing TED Talk, as would Catherine, as would Dr. Salter. But you guys, man, oh man, what a combo that would be. But Gary first, we have to get him there. Okay, finish your thought. He's off the reservation here. He's not wrapped real tight. What's going on?
Well, there's something about speaking about serial killers in a forum called a TED Talk that sort of kind of just a little.
Hang on,
right. Well, it's disturbing. I mean, but so this guy is
that gets an applause.
So the key to this guy is really this mixture of a gigantic ego, a smoldering kind of rage, a slight that keeps getting renewed with every rejection, and you wind up with this guy that probably looked like a faculty member and is able to just stroll right onto the campus.
Which he did, by the way.
There you are. Strolls right onto the campus, and that's a nice comment. Strolls right onto the campus and commits this horrible act. It's interesting, Chris, because one of the things you emphasized in your telling of the story were these chance events that led to certain people living and certain people not living. And by the way, by all accounts, your son was a hero who saved quite a number of lives by barricading them, and I think he deserves an enormous amount of respect for that. Is that not true? He barricaded
8 people.
Yeah, and is responsible for them being here today. Which he and
his colleague, he and another guy, grabbed everybody. And one of them was a student who had earplugs in, and they were listening to the iPods, and they literally pulled him out of the chair and drug him down the hallway and threw him into their office. But
it's just amazing. Yeah. But this point about that arbitrariness, it's important because with this type of personality, you want to understand that they feel like God coming in, right, and kind of with retribution. That's a word we're going to hear a lot tonight, with retribution for the slights. And so what happens is, part of what they enjoy is that they don't know who they're going to kill. It's guns blazing, and if you happen to make a move this way instead of that way, you may or may not die. And you'll see, like, for example, in the case of Elliot Rodger, there were a whole bunch of things like that. For example, when he had originally intended to kill his stepmother, who I think was the original source of hatred of women, and his little brother, whom he envied enormously, thinking that he was more loved than he was, right? So you got envy and misogyny, from childhood. He wanted to kill them, of course, because they were symbolically the root of everything. But he doesn't, because his father, whom he loved and did not want to hurt, happened to be home. So he didn't kill them. He went to part B of the plan. And then he had intended to go guns blazing when somebody answered the door at a sorority that he thought had the quote unquote hottest girls that he most wanted to hurt, but nobody answered the door. So instead, he turns around and he starts firing into the street and hits several women that are just walking down the street.
Okay, so hold on to that thought, because we're going to get to him at the end.
But it's that same arbitrary thing, right? You get what I'm saying? So it's all about that feeling like you're coming into the world like God, and whether a person lives or dies is just a matter of their will or their randomness. And you saw a lot of that with the Polito case. And that's what I want to get at, is one of the themes I want to talk about that's very important with this type of offender is amusing themselves at the idea of randomness. That because that makes them feel kind of like God. It creates chaos. You never know who's going to be hit. It could be anybody at any time. So it gets the whole world afraid. And what do we call that? What do we call a person who does that? A terrorist.
Yeah,
That's what a terrorist is. So what you really want to understand is these people are like right in that twilight zone between a political terrorist and a mass murderer. Right? There are mass murderers who engage in it's like a terrorism surrounding a type of person they're mad at instead of a group of people that a political group hates. That's the whole idea. And consequently, they use military style weapons a lot of time because as far as they're concerned, they wouldn't mind if they killed every single person. It's just like the people in a war. So you go in, anybody in that school, they might as well be the people wearing the uniform of the other army, and I'll kill them all. Right? That's the idea. So I really want the audience to grasp that Polito would have been very happy to shoot everybody in that place, and he went in with tons of ammo.
No, he had over 160 some odd rounds on him. He could have, it could have been a lot worse had the cops not caught him downstairs. I think he was headed to another building.
I would be very surprised if he wasn't, because retribution, it doesn't burn low that quickly.
Yeah.
The idea is to go out with as many victims as possible, because you're going to be killed or kill yourself during the attack. It's like a military style mission, and you see yourself as a kind of a hero going into, so the idea is to go out in a blaze with as many victims as possible.
So when they get to the psychological shift, what precipitates the actual shift into, okay, motion, it's going now, we're on?
Well, first of all, let me be clear that there would be a very different answer if we were talking about the type that are closer to being more mentally ill or just purely emotional and angry and in an impulsive way, where you just pick something up and go out into the street, right? With this type that's more of a schemer and a plotter, what happens is they're already kind of walking around, and in their lives there's like this miniature, this microcosm version of what they later do in their interactions. So you can predict, if you're profiling, you can predict that there are going to be these little interactions with people. I said this about Kohberger, for example, as a suspect, that you could predict this kind of weird, angry, paranoid way of interacting with people where you're always feeling that you're leveling the playing field. So you go into a setting, the person who represents the group that you're angry at rejects you or doesn't understand you or hurts your feelings, and you take it out on them verbally, maybe even physically. That's exactly the same dynamic that's going to play out in large scale later, right? So like in the Kohberger case, which is a mass murder, he's the accused, of course, innocent until proven guilty. But in his case, we were able to predict that you would have seen a miniature version of the killing in his little interactions with people. I'm better than you. I'm expressing aggression toward you. You're a female and I don't think very much of you. You don't understand me, so I hate you. The world doesn't need you. They don't, and so that personality structure is very common in these types of people, right? And similarly, because remember, Kohberger did the same thing these guys did a lot of writing, because it's all about ultimately thinking, I know more than you do, and wanting the attention, right? So what precipitates it is an event that's like the last straw. So you're walking around for a long time feeling slighted, rejected, incapable of having a relationship, thinking, no one appreciates your genius. And then boom, there's an event that's just too much. And the person says, that's it, I'm done. I'm now going to commit the large scale version of what I normally do in day-to-day life to feel better about myself. So that these guys, clearly were not, shall we say, very popular socially and all that, right? I mean, you can make a pretty good bet that.
So one of the questions that had come up here is, they feel godlike, but why did they off themselves at the end.
Well, the whole point is that the individual doesn't want to exist in a world that doesn't appreciate them. It's like they think they're depriving the world. And also for some of them, there's a martyr complex. So it's sort of like, like being crucified or something. You see yourself as kind of going out, on the cross, I died for the cause, I whatever, because that grandiosity is tainted. Remember, there's almost a bipolar like kind of quality there where you're grandiose and completely self-loathing at the same time, right? Really, I suppose it's a manifestation of narcissism. You're inflated to conceal the fact that you feel like a crumb. And so that, of course, it culminates with them wanting to go out. But there's also a control element. Why should I let myself be captured? I mean, even Kaczynski couldn't tolerate dying of natural causes. He committed suicide recently.
Interesting.
Right. So that it's just a matter of, when with some of these guys. But it's a control mechanism right to the very end.
So
Right.
a good segue into the Unabomber. Break him down for us tonight. And guys and gals, if you have questions, I'm trying to flag as many as I can, so we'll get to them for Dr. B.
Is the audience finding this interesting?
Are you guys liking what you're hearing so far?
I hope so. I mean, we could always, if it's coming across to people as too didactic or anything, not learning anything, let me know.
Looks like you got a winner.
Okay. So, well, what is there to say about Kaczynski? Because the most interesting thing about him is really that he had an extraordinary IQ. His IQ was 167 on the IQ test that was given in those days, which was a genius level IQ.
Wow.
And I mean, he was 15 years old when he went to Harvard, and he wound up, he winds up a professor and the whole thing. He was brilliant. Really, there's no denying he was a
professor as well.
He was a professor. He was a lot of these guys, this type, if they get old enough without committing their acts, do wind up in these kind of cerebral positions because they are intelligent. They just think that they're, I mean, we talked about Koberger. Koberger was in a doctoral program, right? I mean, so that type, that mastermind type, tends to be educated. If you were profiling, if you didn't know who committed this, you would one of these offenses, you would posit somebody who had a higher education, and often you see that in the writing, in the verbiage that they use. Do you know that if you take any piece of writing and put it into Word on in Office, you can run a readability statistic on it, and it will tell you the educational level required to write that document. And if you were to take the kind of document the Unabomber wrote and put it into those programs, you would see that the readability statistic is probably, like advanced education required to follow it, right? He was a very, very intelligent guy. And, as Sherlock Holmes famously said, he was talking to Watson and he said, "It's a wicked world, and when a clever man turns his brain to crime, it's the worst of all." Well, there's a lot of truth to that. And because you then have that combination of being incredibly brilliant and incredibly angry and able to use that intelligence in a horrifying way. So what Kaczynski does is he starts creating these. Well, first he drops his whole life and he goes and lives in Montana in a cabin. And he becomes obsessed with the environment and what human beings are doing to affect the environment. And he, at this point, is starting to manifest a lot of signs consistent with schizophrenia. It's very odd. His appearance becomes more disheveled. He's kind of isolated. He's got stewing and these ideas, and he's very paranoid. And what happens is he takes that meticulous kind of brain of his and he turns it to creating these extremely intricate bombs. And he starts sending them out to people whom he sees as kind of tied to his gripe, his mission. But sometimes there's like a seeming randomness too, like I was talking about, because the wrong person could pick the box up or the postman could be holding it when it goes. But usually they're designed that when the package is opened, something gets pulled and it triggers the bomb and the explosion goes off. 3 people died A number were injured. He falls into the category of a serial killer because there were 2 or more victims separated in time by cooling off period. Even by the old definition of 3 or more, he's a serial killer. And what winds up happening is, John Douglas, that group, they get involved and they start noticing that there are these weird clues that this guy is sort of either on purpose or accidentally giving away, where like the fake name that he puts on the return address or whatever, there are all these references to wood. It's almost like an obsessional preoccupation with the woods, with wood. And so they start speculating this guy lives out in the woods somewhere, like in a cabin, or he's like isolated from people. He's obsessed with the environment, because what is that preoccupation about? And they, of course, could tell from the writing that he had that obsession. And ultimately, it turns out that the Unabomber's brother is able to recognize that he's the person who's doing this, and it all collapses. But the Unabomber is an extremely interesting guy because he's a serial killer that really has no sexual motivation at all. It's just an expression of anger towards people that he thinks are hurting the environment in some way. And so that's him. And I also want to kind of pause and tell the audience about this word manifesto, which is very interesting because manifesto in Italian means, well, it means 2 things. It means a poster, but it also means manifest, out in the open, right? Just visible to everyone. And the whole idea of it is that it's like you take what it is that you're thinking and you've written it up in a way that you can put it in the public square and everyone can read it. Like it's on a poster. It's out in the open. It's manifest, right? So the whole idea is I want everyone to know what it is that I'm extremely furious about. Now, the other thing, yeah, go ahead.
Can you grab this question from Vet Girl? What part do you think social media has played in developing mass shooters?
Well, now that sort of takes us off the beaten path a minute. And what I think we should do is I actually think we should touch on that when we're done going through the offenders. And I promise I'll come back to it. But I think it will make more sense, particularly after we talk about Rodger. I think it's a great question, and we definitely should talk about that. Now, one thing I want to say about Kaczynski that always interested me. Kaczynski, his parents were Polish Roman Catholics. They converted to, well, they became atheists, and he sort of grew up in this kind of environment where everything was basically just fact driven and kind of mechanical. And when he got his IQ tested and they took him out of ordinary school and put him into the advanced grade, he started getting tormented. The older kids were really abusing him. I mean, he was getting bullied horribly. And that he always said that was a turning point for him. What's so interesting about it is this, if you want to get Freudian for a minute, what's interesting about it is that what was bothering him was the environment into which he was placed. But it manifests later as anger at what it is that stupid people, in his opinion, were doing to the literal environment. So that it isn't just my feelings are hurt because, the environment in which I find myself hurts me. It became more like you're responsible for this, and it was interesting because, especially when he was targeting authority figures that he saw as responsible for policies that were causing this, I always thought it was a kind of a gripe towards the parents, those figures of authority that had plucked him out of a pleasant environment and put him in a bad one.
And what led you to that analysis of him?
It's a psychological, it's like a symbolism, because remember that point I always make about the prototype. When you're talking about a serial killer, you got to ask yourself, who is the original that you're mad at? So the victims, what do they have in common with the parents? They're authority figures. They're responsible for affecting the environment in a way which he finds daunting and unpleasant, that he feels he has no control over, etc. So I always thought that symbolism was really interesting when you think about Ted Kaczynski and what might have triggered him. Now, where do you want to go from Kaczynski to Zodiac?
Would you have dinner with? Would he be the kind of guy that you could sit down and have dinner with him and go, you know what, he's not a bad guy, or would his quirkiness be so far off the rails? It'd be like I don't know about this guy.
Well, I have, during the course of my career, remember that in addition to my work in violence, I'm considered an authority on the subject of schizophrenia and psychotic, right? And I have met many people that in the DSM-4 would have been called schizophrenia, paranoid subtype. They tend to be brighter than other people with schizophrenia. They don't really have negative symptoms, so they can look more intact emotionally. And what tends to happen with them is they fixate on topics and they kind of go on and on about them, and you really can't get them off the topic. It's very paranoid. It's very fixated. I think, let me put it this way. I don't think he would be a horrible guy to have a conversation with, but it would be about what he wanted to talk about. And if he felt that you were sort of dumb or unable to agree with him, I think you would have gotten an earful of condescension. So that's him.
Well, even Ted was fixated with Zodiac, right? Tell everybody about that connection.
Well, what it is really that people thought they were the same person. When they were looking for the Unabomber, one of the ideas that was, and I talk about this in New Evil, one of the ideas that was put out there is that maybe Zodiac, who had not been captured, and Ted Kaczynski were one and the same. And that, of course, has now been laid to rest because of the impossibility based on where Kaczynski was. By the way, I'm literally giving a TED talk, right? Talking about Ted Kaczynski. Yeah. But I am, right? Well, it's true. But I think that with Zodiac, you can certainly imagine that these guys are both going to fall into the same kind of place on a criminal spectrum. I place both of them in category 16 on the scale that Michael and I do, in the mastermind type, right? The type whose intelligence is always sort of showing itself as their way of insulting you. So in other words, they don't just kill you to level the playing field. They've also got to be 100 times smarter than you. The Zodiac case is very intricate. To get into the details would take a long time. I'll just say that the most interesting thing about him is that in addition to his murders, Zodiac seems to have figured out that he didn't need to kill anymore after the killing of Paul Stein, the cab driver in San Francisco, because if his killings were random enough, he could take credit for anything. So his whole thing was he just wanted to be able to boast so that you were scared of him. And in his letters after the Paul Stein murder, when he seems to have kind of gone into dormancy, he's still writing letters, but he's not killing anymore. He starts boasting these ridiculous numbers of victims, 37 and all these very high numbers. But that's not true. There are a very small number of canonical victims of Zodiac. And so the whole thing with him is I'm sort of toying with all of you because I can be anywhere at any time. I could still be out there, and I make the crimes look like, they're just random killings, and and he said so in his letters that he says, oh, I'm going to start to make them look like random shootings and all, so that this way, anytime anything happens that's a cold case, you wonder, could it have been Zodiac? So that was his cleverness, and of course using codes.
Do these kind of guys like Zodiac, hypothetically, they're not consumed with an essay piece of this? Are they more of a thrill kill? I mean, what's going on here, and do they get consumed by that?
It's extremely interesting, this question, because what happens is that sometimes, like in the case of the accused Koberger, who has, if he is guilty, has a similar quality. What we had said from the beginning, before there was even a suspect, was that if there was a sexualized element, it was kind of covert, right? It was a manifestation of frustration in that department and anger toward women, but there wasn't going to be like an overt essay or anything like that, right? And right. You see that in the case of Zodiac, it's more like that. For example, Zodiac, it was very clear, was more interested in the women than the men. The men, are kind of, they tend to live because he doesn't fire as many bullets at them, or there's a quick dispatch of the male because of the emphasis on the woman. And there are these things that happen to the women that are a little extra. Like, for example, in his first, kind of canonical kill in the the Jensen and Faraday murders, what happens there is they're out in a lover's lane on Lake Herman Road, and over there in California, and what happens is, he kind of comes up and like fires into the window to kind of herd them out, and he shoots the male pretty quickly, and he's eliminated, and then the woman, the female, is running in the pitch black. They can tell from the scene that she's running, and he's basically hunting her, and he puts a pencil light on the back of the scope so that it makes a little dot of light where the bullet is going to hit. That was one of his devious inventions, and the light points directly at her back, and he shoots in a very tight shape, a tight circular round of bullets directly into her back, and she falls there and dies. So there's this whole idea of hunting and outsmarting, and this, so it's a little sexualized, that hunting of a female. And also we saw in the Lake Berryessa killing of Cecilia Shepard, Brian Hartnell lives, her date, but that's where he puts that ridiculous costume on. You see it depicted in the movie. What happens there is that he's stabbing her in sexualized zones, like near the breast and but he doesn't do that to the male. The male is stabbed in the back, and not that many times, and he lives, right? And she doesn't. So there's a little bit of an expression of that, but it's not that overtly sexual. And you want to understand that, because for these kind of people, it's not like I want to express domination and control through sex. It's I want to express domination and control through my brain and being smarter than you.
Are there any parental dynamics at play into these?
There could be, but the trouble is we don't know who Zodiac was. But you could make an educated guess that there was some reason why he loved needling authority the way that he did. I mean, he hated cops. He loved the idea of outsmarting everyone, and he was a major attention seeker. The whole thing with him was to send letters and codes to newspapers and other people. Melvin Belli, the flamboyant lawyer that was on Star Trek, by the way.
Yeah,
remember him? He loved attention, and so that was very, very important to him. But if you get into the Zodiac case, it kind of drives you a little out of your mind, because it's filled with intrigue, and because he was so intelligent and did things that were so devious, you start imagining that he did things that were a little over the top. Like you start reading into it too much and thinking like, oh, it's not a coincidence that there was a reference to water in every location where there's a murder, these kind of like overreading. And that's exactly what he wanted. He wanted you to, and he would lie all the time. Like when they came out with this image of him, this drawing of him, he lied and said that he had figured out how to completely change his appearance, so that when he was walking around at the time of a kill, that he would look nothing like he did in ordinary life, so you'd never catch him. Like he was always kind of doing that. He figured out that if he put airplane glue on his fingertips, he would leave no prints.
So he was a pretty super glue guy.
Right. Yeah, he was really intelligent. There's no question. I mean, even the Navy couldn't crack the codes that he came up with for quite a long time. Another example is that recently they started taking the stamps off of some of his letters to look for DNA, and they found evidence that one of the letters, the stamp, wasn't even licked by a human. There was some evidence that he may have put it under the tongue of some kind of rodent to lick for him, and that's before there was even DNA, that they knew about DNA.
Wow.
So he was a very intelligent guy, and and had that mastermind quality. And he was a prolific writer.
Did they find out what kind of animal it was? I mean, like a rat or a
chipmunk. That's one of the reasons that they're suspicious. Yeah, one of the reasons that they're suspicious of Arthur Lee Allen, the guy that Polito thought Zodiac was. That Arthur Lee Allen raised them. He raised chipmunks.
No way.
Yeah, he used to raise them. In fact, in the movie, they, as a nod to that, you see the chipmunks running around in the cage in the trailer, but I don't know how many people caught that, because you have to really know the case to know. Yeah. So, so he had that quality, and again,
I need a chipmunk emoji now. You do. Go ahead.
But isn't that fascinating? So he was a very intelligent guy, but they sort of take it haywire, in terms of how they interpret it. The interesting thing is, that they thought that Kaczynski, who had this brilliant IQ, could be him, could be Zodiac, which tells you something about the lure of Zodiac, that we've turned him into this larger than life figure, right?
Wow.
Yeah, right.
That is fascinating. That is fascinating. Okay, so let's go to
Oh God,
our guy here, and I think we're going to probably grab a lot of questions coming in about even BK, and are there even, I mean, you've talked about it behind the scenes, but
a lot of people think that they're similar. If Kohlberger's guilty, a lot of people think there are shades of him and Rodger.
Okay, so I've got a little video here that I've pulled up. You've asked me to pull this up earlier, and I've put something together. I went on the internet, and it's all over the place if you start looking for it. But
Sue has a chipmunk. Well, I guess is that a squirrel or I can't quite tell. But
it's Sue.
Yeah.
There you go. That's hysterical. Welcome to the New Year's Eve. We got to get some hats going here in a couple of minutes. But Sue, that's historic. And Lourdes, you've got the same one. I absolutely love it. We got to get this chipmunk thing going here. And I know, Teresa, you know what I'm talking about, because I know you go to that place. And you're probably laughing on the other side too. Here they come. Here they come. I love it. Absolutely love it. Oh, speaking of chipmunks, so let me.
I don't know what you're about. There's something about the phrase "speaking of chipmunks" followed by an ellipsis that kind of horrifies me. I don't know what you're about to say, but
okay. Well, you're the doctor. You know these people better than anybody I've ever met. But I got to tell you, I think anybody that's ever watched these videos on this guy, he is one chilling dude. He really is. And we need chipmunk swag. Exactly. We'll get a Dr. Brucato chipmunk swag. But that's hysterical. Okay, where was I going here? She threw me off. This is great, Muddy Paws. Thank you so much. And I love it. All right, so I watch these videos. I can't tell you how many times, but I mean, he is really one chilling dude. And so I'm going to play a little of this, then I'm going to stop. And you want to lay the foundation here for Mr. Rodger, or where do you want to go here? Or do you want to play the video first?
Well, I think what I'll say before you show it is that what I think, and I've never heard anybody say this before, it's just, the shrink in me. But I think to understand the roots of Rodger, you have to understand that, first of all, he had a life of privilege. His father was a film director, and his mother also, she's a nurse, but she has like connection to the film industry, and he's going to like movie premieres and all these, like going to like getting special seats at concerts of the hottest singers, whatever. So he's a very like privileged guy, and so that's important as a seed to this story, and because he can have anything he wants, right? That's the clue, right? That he thinks he can get everything he wants. And then what happens is his father winds up, the marriage falls apart, and he gets together with another woman, and Rodger and she don't get along. He hates her guts. And then a new child is born, and Rodger starts experiencing this incredible, it's almost like Cain and Abel, this incredible jealousy that the parents might love this kid more, right? Very Cain and Abel, right? Am I my brother's keeper, right? So that you have this kind of quality of that from the beginning. He's seething. Now, let me point something out, because Rodger always made this mistake. Rodger used to say in his writing, he would go back and forth between using the words jealous and envious. And let me just explain, those are not the same sin, right? Jealousy is where you're dealing with a relationship, and in the relationship you think that someone is more loved than you are. Envy is about a thing or a quality. You don't get envious of a relationship, you get jealous of it. And so I think it's interesting that he had those he made that mistake of because for him, you kind of can't tell the difference. The root was jealousy, right? And then it turned into a kind of envy, as we'll see. So he winds up very kind of narcissistic, very grandiose. And the other thing about him is, this is very controversial, a lot of people claim that he was diagnosed with high functioning autism, and that this was the reason, and this comes up with a lot of this type of offender, that this was the reason that he was so completely clueless about the way that people were perceiving him and why he was failing at relationships, because objectively speaking, he actually had a lot to offer in a relationship. He wasn't a hideous looking guy, although we wondered if he was. He was a normal looking guy. He had privilege and so forth, and he couldn't, as a teenager, he couldn't get women to be interested in him, and he didn't understand that he was odd interpersonally. Now, I have not made my mind up about whether I agree with that. I will tell you that the literature for a long time has said that people on the spectrum have like virtually no chance of being violent. But the problem is that the few exceptions that there are have committed particularly spectacular violent acts. So that it's like there's this tiny, but when you hear that somebody's on the spectrum, forget about them being violent. That's right, ridiculous, right? But there's this tiny little fragment where there are other traits that can be mixed in there. For example, Adam Lanza, the shooter in Sandy Hook, was also diagnosed with autism, right? So, but it makes you wonder, were they accurately diagnosed? Were they really psychotic? Was it really severe personality stuff with Rodger? Who knows? We're not here to say. I'm only saying people wondered about that with him. Whatever the reason, the etiology, he had that same problem we see in the Kohberger case, right? The accusations about Kohberger, where you just can't understand that you're weirding people out, and that's why you can't get a date, or people, you think it's them, right? And so he starts getting sucked up first with the family and then out in the world in puberty with women generally, and men that he was jealous of, right? That he thought were good looking and had more privilege than he did, who could get the quote unquote hot girls. For this guy, women were totally interchangeable. There are videos of him driving down the street and saying things like, "Look at that hot girl. I couldn't have her. Look at that hot girl." So that it's as if it didn't matter which one it was. They were just like all part of an amorphous blob in his mind, right? And it was like the epitome of misogyny. You just hate the entire group, and they're all now. And so what happens is this starts festering and brewing, and festering and brewing, and then it culminates in this incident where he goes to a party and he tries to throw a woman off a balcony, and instead he gets thrown off the balcony by some frat guys that are there, and he hates them too, by the way.
He gets his leg broken, right?
Yeah, they exactly. And then they beat him, and this for about a year starts to cause him to hate them even more. So now it's like, I pushed you to do something that makes me mad, and now I have a justification to kill you, right? So that now for about a year he starts plotting and scheming how he's going to take this all out. And what happens is he comes up with this multi-part plan. And the multi-part plan is basically a spree killing. He's going to start by killing the stepmother and his brother, the sibling. He's going to start by killing them. But that gets thwarted because the father comes home, right? But he wants to kill them. Then he's going to go, I'm trying to remember what was next in the plot. I think the next thing was he was going to go to he wanted to kill his roommates that he thought were better at getting with women. Then he's going to go to a sorority with the quote unquote hottest women. He's going to bang on the door while he's armed. Whoever comes to the door, he's going to go in guns blazing. He's going to kill that. So you wind up with this multi-part scheme, and then he's going to drive around and use a car and just ram it into whoever he could, right? So he's like armed to the teeth, and he starts making these videos. Now, this really interesting thing happens. Somebody sees one of his videos, contacts law enforcement, as a good citizen should. Law enforcement goes and does a wellness check, and they believe this guy. He bamboozles them that he's perfectly fine. If they had looked in his bedroom, they would have found a manifesto in which he outlines his murderous plot and loads of weapons, but they never checked. They just talk to him like, you know, in the front of the house, and he, you know, or and he basically says, "I'm fine, don't worry about me." So that to me is very depressing. That could have potentially stopped things. And then what eventually happens is he sends, on the day of retribution, he sends this message to like his former therapists and like his parents and teachers and everybody. And then the parents get in the car and they race to try to get to him to stop him. Everybody's racing there, but it's too late. He moved to part B when he couldn't kill the stepmother and the sibling. And he goes into the place where he's living with a bunch of guys and he stabs them and a friend of theirs who was like an innocent bystander. If I remember, it was 147 stabs. Just an absolute frenzy. Can you imagine the crime scene, Chris?
Yeah, we used to say the knife went on full auto.
Well, right. So you got to picture this guy furious, absolutely furious. And all of these guys are basically his brother, symbolically, right? The guy that's loved more by the woman that I want to have, right? So it's totally Oedipal. So, and well, more like a Cain and Abel thing. So he mutilates them, right? And then after mutilating them, he goes to the sorority, bangs on the door, and in one of those moments of fate, nobody answers the door. So then he starts firing into the street, and that's when part D of the plan goes into action. And he's one of these rare mass killers who gets in the car and is literally firing out of the car, just randomly hits somebody with the vehicle on a bike, fires into a store and kills a guy in his 20s, just right through the door. There's video footage of that you probably could find on the internet of people diving. They were like buying things in a convenience store and they're diving for cover, shooting all over them, but the cops are chasing him. And then cornered, he has nothing to do except commit suicide, which he does with the firearm. And that's the end of the story. And he winds up killing 6 people and injuring a lot of people along the way. And it was all fueled by essentially an incel story, right? An involuntary celibate who projected onto other people blame for his inability to have the love and the sexual encounters that he was craving.
Is that the definition of incel, the involuntary
celibate, right? And I think sometimes this gets overblown. Ann Burgess and I are actually looking at this in our research at Boston College, but the incel theme comes up in a lot of manifestos, but I think it's overblown. It puts a lot of blame on people who identify as asexual or have more atypical kind of forms of sexuality, or even people on the spectrum where a lot of times there's an overlap with being asexual. So people get kind of confused about what that word really means. But what it means is a person who desires to have sexual relationships. They don't identify as asexual. They just look asexual because they can't get with anybody. They can't get together with anybody. And so the whole thing becomes this incredible manifestation of, I suppose, covert sexual aggression, right? But it's like a gigantic expression of jealousy.
So let's play a little bit of this video, just kind of set up to your point, and then tell us, analyze for us, what's going on here with him when I stop it, and then how you have seen the progression in these guys. And I know you have a big study, you and Dr. Burgess have a big study going on now at Boston College about these kind of.
Mostly you mean looking at the manifestos?
Yes, at the manifesto.
Yeah, that Ann's work, yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay, so I'm going to play the video, and trigger warning, everybody. Just giving you a heads up, seriously. This guy is just off the rails for me. But anyway, we're going to play it here for a minute. So if you don't feel comfortable watching him on New Year's Eve, please, just come back later and watch. We got almost, just under 2,000 people here, 1,700 people here. So thank you for being here on this New Year's Eve with Dr. Brucato and I. But I just want to give everybody a heads up, please. If this is going to, let me find my banner here. It's not domestic violence, but it is definitely problematic. Okay, so let's mods. Let's put some warnings in there as well. Okay, here we go with Elliot.
This is my last video. It all has to come to this. Tomorrow is the day of retribution. The day in which I will have my revenge against humanity. Against all of you. I'm 22 years old, and I'm still a virgin. It's not fair. You girls have never been attracted to me. I don't know why you girls aren't attracted to me, but I will punish you all for it. You denied me a happy life. And in turn, I will deny all of you life. It's only fair. I hate all of you. I can't wait to give you exactly what you deserve. Utter annihilation.
Okay, that's just one part.
Gives you the chills, right?
Huh?
Gives you the chills.
Oh my gosh! I mean, I've sat across guys like that, and when they say stuff, not as crazy as that one, but I've had some pretty crazy guys, as you know, and I'm like, okay, let's take a break. What do you think? And I look over at my partner, and he's like, yeah, let's get out of here. And you can almost feel the room change, the temperature of that room change. I mean, it really was a wow moment. How do you get into this guy's head, Gary? How do you do that?
Well, he gives us a lot of information to get into his head. That's what he longs for. He wants someone to get into his head. That's the whole, I think the subtext of all this writing is that kind of loneliness that you live in a cerebral world where you feel more intelligent than other people. You think about things that other people don't think about. And there's this wonderful joy if you find one person who does, but you usually don't, right? So these people are kind of sitting around stewing in this thing of looking at the world through a different lens. And and he's desperately trying to find anybody who understands. You see the same desperation in the Koberger case with posting about his mental illness online. It's like a shriek, right? There's a phenomenon that they used to talk about in psychiatry in the 19th century. They don't talk about it anymore, but it was called the cri de coeur, a cry of the heart. And it was like when a person committed a behavior that looked manifestly awful, but like underneath it, there was this pathetic attempt to kind of like stop committing it. That like they wanted to get caught or they wanted somebody to pay attention to them. It was like a shriek from the heart of like, I am just pathetically lonely. Like, will someone pay attention to me for God's sake? But this guy, you got to understand, at the time he was making these videos, this is something people would say about him. So he would, like, one day he'd wake up and he'd be like, okay, today I'm going to try to have a good day. I'm going to go by the water. I'm going to take a walk. I'm going to chill out. I'm going to, and he'd get there and then he would encounter a couple, a particularly attractive couple. And he would interpret it that the universe or other people or God or whatever had intentionally put those people there to mock him. And he would become furious. He would seethe. And then he would say on his videos, how dare those people walk around looking happy like that, rubbing it in my face like that. And that's where he starts getting that idea, like they've all got to die, they've all got to pay. So it's that kind of paranoid interpretation that other people's happiness is an insult to you. What's very interesting about this, Chris, to the, because we sometimes talk about the spiritual. When I think about this kind of offender, and I'm not resorting to a theological explanation of what they're doing,
Right.
but there's this interesting thing where, they used to ask me in seminary, what is the sin of Lucifer? And the answer is it envy or is it jealousy? Well, it's really jealousy. It's the idea that God created humans and loved them more than angels. That's the story, right? And so because he loved them in a way that angels couldn't be loved by him, they were angry and rebelled, right? So then what does this figure that we call the devil do? Going around intentionally destroying the happy relationship that people have with God out of a bitterness. I can't have it. Why should you? Right? So that's why people like this smack of they almost have a diabolical, because they become like Mephistophelian, sitting there, and actually Roger does it in the video. Right, that chortle, like you're some kind of a, tapping your fingers together in an evil way. But I still think you want to think of him as a deeply personality disturbed guy. I don't think we have to resort to the theological, but it's interesting that kind of parallel with that idea. And I think that's why we think of it as so evil. Right.
One of the, a lot of the comments were because his dad was obviously into Hollywood and very successful. Do you think part of that was, just, an act of sort, or was it really this? I mean, was it a psychosis, or was he acting and playing into it?
It's a really interesting question. Let's put it this way. He was certainly obsessed with the idea that he was left out, and that there was something about him that was simply not good enough for the world, and it depressed him and made him furious. But the center of that Tootsie Roll Pop, right, the center of it is that he didn't understand that the only reason people had an issue with him is that he was nasty and weird. So that whatever that is, that's the central issue. That's the central pathology. And then there's this sort of creation of like people are talking about here, just like Zodiac did, just like you create this kind of menacing persona to put out a vibe of like, well, I don't want you anyway, right? I don't need you anyway. So that I could care less. But I think that if somebody had loved some of these people, things might have gone a little differently. That's very difficult to think about, but I bet it's true, because I have personally interacted with people clinically that I have sent to the hospital, or etc., drawn lore, they turn themselves in.
I have to ask, if this guy walks into your office,
right? They're making
walk me through.
Yeah,
walk me through that one. Oh,
right, between chipmunks and Tootsie Roll Pops, the title of my autobiography.
Oh my, yeah, we're gonna get. Oh my gosh. Okay, don't get me started. Okay, so I'm gonna play some more. So everybody, put your seatbelts back on. We're gonna go to the other part.
Now they're putting lollipops in the chat.
Elliot Rodger here. Right now I'm just taking a walk through the park in this really nice, secluded area. I'm just contemplating about my life and how unfair it's been lately. Ever since I started desiring girls, but they never desired me back. Life has been a living hell since then. Right now it's spring break. Everyone else my age is out having fun with their friends and their girlfriends. Here I am, taking lonely walks through a park. Hey, Elliot Rodger here. I'm sitting in my car.
Okay, he's out walking. Well, I mean,
while filming, it's lonely, right?
Is there a lot of transfer going on here with the rest of the world around him?
Well, I mean, I think the idea is that he clearly doesn't want to be lonely. I mean, a person who really hates the world is not going to be putting himself on camera like that and walking. And remember, his father, whom you admired greatly, was a director. It was infused, from the beginning, that's a way of like casting a very large net and getting a lot of people to love and admire you, is like the screen, right? Both of his parents were involved in film. So that this thing of making films of himself, it's like just picking up from them the notion that, you could be like a little director and I think what people are picking up on, and I think they're right, is that he was performative because he saw himself as like directing a scene or, plotting out everything. And so that, yeah, there is a little whiff of that, the director as control freak, that kind of thing, which of course, everybody always says the director is like a metaphor for God, but that's kind of the way they feel.
This reminds me of the time you said that, in the background, in the dark, is where we would find the type of personality that did the Idaho case. Yeah, and to see him, here it's broad daylight, but really in his mind it's so dark where he's at in such a deep place. Is this what you were kind of referring to, this type of personality type?
Well, what I meant about that in the context of the Idaho murders is a theme that comes up really with serial killers, which is this idea that the person crafts a alter ego that is the fantasy figure, the deliverer of justice, the punisher, the character who is going to regain dominance and control in a world that has hurt you. And but what you find in a lot of those people, particularly the more socially inept type, is that they do it in such a way that you don't really see them, or you do it in the dark, or you do it from like by writing letters, or doing it from someplace where you can conceal what you really are, kind of like the Wizard of Oz, where you're hiding behind the curtain and acting loud and scary. But like if you pull the curtain away, you're just like an old guy trying to pull the strings and scare people. And and I think that's kind of, you saw that with Robert Hansen, the serial killer that would hunt women in the dark. One of the things John Douglas and the profilers realized was that the bullets were in their backs, and so the bullets were in their backs. So that's how they concluded that he didn't want to be seen.
Yeah, he used to take them up to Alaska, right?
Well, he was from Alaska, that's right, and he would take them out to a deserted area in a plane, to a forested area, hunt them, and it was clear that he was shooting them naked because the bullet holes were in their bodies but not in the clothes. So he could redress them, and all the bullets were in the back. So the idea was he was hunting them in the dark, and from behind where they couldn't see him, he was like a god, right? And in the darkness. So John Douglas surmised perhaps there's something about him that makes him insecure because he doesn't want them to look at him. It's all from the back. And you see a little of that in the Kohberger case, for example, where the idea of doing it in the dark when you think people are sleeping, or maybe people are intoxicated or whatever, so that they just don't see you. You could be whatever you want, right? Or you make a fake identity and you post all over the internet. And again, I think to a certain extent, in the Kohberger case too, you see that cri de coeur, that shriek that comes first, where you're posting on the internet about your problems and hoping someone will listen. So that you start to understand that for some of these guys, they see this as like the last resort, the last way to get attention. And I find that very sad. It's like a person who's trying to make a science out of how to get attention, right? So they try, because we learned in the Rodgers case, for example, the Rodger case, Rodger tried to make a total science out of it. And he got this idea, I need to have certain looks, and I need to work out, and I need to be attractive. And when that didn't work, he got this very concrete idea that he had to win the lotto. And he started spending enormous amounts of money on lotto tickets because he thought that if he had a lot of money, he could get with a woman. And then that didn't work. So it's like he tried everything under the sun. And when nothing worked, he said, I got to take it by force. And I think you see that in the Kohberger story. If Kohberger is guilty, that same process. Maybe if I lose weight, someone will like me. Maybe if I'm the TA, they'll like me. Maybe if I'm the smartest person, they'll like me. Maybe if and it goes, he tries everything in the book and it doesn't work. And then it culminates.
So here's a question from Marlene. Does theory of mind apply to Elliot?
Well, theory of mind is something that's going to come up a lot in like when you talk about autism and certain kind of conditions, even schizophrenia. But theory of mind essentially, how do you say it in a nutshell? It has to do with like understanding the way that other people are feeling, the way that they might be interpreting you. And yeah, I think that gets right to the heart of a lot of the problems with these guys, because it's that whole thing of like, it can't be me. It must simply, the common denominator must be all of you. Right? Because if you're thinking like a scientist, but you have no insight, you have a blind spot about you, your conclusion will be, it must be all of you. I'll tell you, in my experience doing therapy for a very long time now, what I find is it usually works in reverse. So like, for example, a person will come from a really chaotic, terrible home, and they can't get a stable sense of love in that home, right? And they're trying to make a science out of it. Like, what do I need to do or not do to get love? So the person concludes incorrectly It must be me. I must be broken or terrible in some way, and that's why the environment is out of control and nobody loves me, right? I'm just worthless. That's a more common way of handling the issue. What these guys do is they do it the other way. They say, I can't get stable love. It must be that all of you are broken, every single one of you. But I'm I'm fantastic, right? And so that with that kind of person, the theory of mind is very poor, because the interpretation is always that everybody else is either sitting at your feet venerating you or needs to be corrected, or etc.
So I have a question, Gary. What are there any? I know, right? I love it.
Sorry for anybody that wants to listen to me for now.
Absolutely love it. So, how can we help our audience? I mean, he's an extreme case where it's obvious when he starts talking, or even if I'm sure when people are hanging around. But are there extreme cases like that inside that have an external facade? And if so, how can we help our audience see through that?
Well, that's a really complicated question. First of all, with this type, I suppose the good news is that they can't hold it in, so that they start writing all over the place desperately. And what happened in the Rodger case, as I said, is someone did catch it. Someone reported it. Someone did what you should do. They red flagged it. The authorities from social media took whatever info they could get, and they tracked that guy down. But then they didn't follow through I mean, I hate to say it, but they didn't follow through in the way that you should.
Yeah, they should have.
They didn't understand that they were dealing with somebody that lies, and that they handled it like it was an emotional, like an emotionally disturbed person, instead of understanding that it was a person with a kind of aberrant personality who could lie to you right to your face. So they fell for it and they left. Same thing happened in the Dahmer case with Dahmer's 14-year-old victim. 2 women called the police because the kid came out bleeding and dazed and drugged. And Dahmer on the spot lied, said, "That's my boyfriend. We just had a dispute. I'll take him back home. Don't worry." Cops never followed up.
Remember my joke?
Yeah. Oh Lord, I remember it, but
can I tell the audience on New Year's Eve? Okay, here we go. Yeah, I don't know if everybody realized they found pizzas in Jeffrey Dahmer's refrigerator, and they had a bunch of human noses on the pizzas. And close your ears, Dr. Brucato. Just so everybody knows, they were Dahmer noses pizzas.
Oh my God. Well,
okay, I love that joke. Well, you got to admit that's pretty funny. That's funny right there. I don't care who you are. That's funny.
Well, it's like a gallows humor, because the case is so horrendous. You have to, if you think about it for 1 minute, it's too horrifying. I mean, you can't even believe that case. I mean, but think about it, Chris. That 14-year-old kid, he took him back inside and ate his heart. I mean, after the police did not follow up. I mean, what I'm trying to get at is like, I think that the answer to that, what do you do, is you tell someone, you tell someone in authority, right? But they have to do more than a 2-minute chat. They should have analyzed his writings online. They should have analyzed his writings online. They should have, understood more about this kind of personality and understood the threat. And it was like a day late and a dollar short when it was finally taken seriously. He was already enacting it, but do some of them hide it? Yes. Some of them keep journals where they privately write endlessly about this stuff, with the fantasy that one day the journal will get discovered and published or something like that, right? And or some of them just kind of think it obsessively, and they can keep a facade up. But I think that with the type of person who's going to commit an offense like this, generally, they're very upset because something has happened to them, and they're acting furious or angry or slighted or whatever. It's not like the serial killer situation where you're totally compartmentalized. Mass murderers tend to be a little bit more emotionally flooded or furious, so you get more clues. They can't hide it. It's those kind of people, Chris. You turn on the bus, or the train or something. You make like a passing comment, and then they start muttering about how furious they are about something, and you're like, man, you got a grudge. Like, you got to chill out.
Yeah,
right? That that kind of person.
You get the weird vibe right away. And I always tell the audience, like you, if any of you out there, are, you women out there, if you feel that gut feeling, you have that vibe, man, you're right. And do not pass it. Do not let it go. Okay, we've got more here on Mr. Elliot. I think he gets really interesting here.
Yeah. Which is exactly what he would have wanted. That's the whole thing. I mean, he gets what he wants. As I said in the last episode, never give in to the demand. But we all do it. We can't help ourselves. He gets that narcissistic validation even in death, which is depressing, but that's what he wants.
Like Teresa says here, always follow your gut 100%. And you're never wrong. I mean, my Karen is never wrong. I'm wrong.
She's pretty intuitive, Chris.
She's very intuitive. I married so far up, you know that. I can't see straight. So I got, I don't know what happened. When I was born, they slapped my mother. A lot of people don't know that, but then they rolled me over, looked at my bottom, and they told her she had twins. So I've lived my whole life like that, I've just been one big dartboard after another.
You have such self-deprecating humor. You have like a Rodney Dangerfield sense of humor. Remember Rodney Dangerfield used to say, I was the inspiration for twin beds.
Yeah. Well, tie a bone around my neck so the dog played with me. Right.
You've got that Rodney Dangerfield thing going on. Yes.
I love it. Okay, so let's get back into Elliot here for a second.
People have questions.
He gets much more interesting. Yeah, and I'm flagging questions all over the place. And if you see them, just go ahead and grab them.
Take a look. I haven't been reading everything, so let's see. If anything interesting jumps out.
Here we go. Dr. Gary, are you using AI with your database to do any type of predictive analysis to identify these types of people?
Well, this is very close to what Anne is doing, where they're using AI to analyze the word patterns, the sentence structure, and the themes in manifestos and writings by offenders. Because, of course, the ultimate goal is to get to a point where people who have similar patterns in what they're writing online can get flagged. Now, of course, this is going to get into a whole civil liberties issue, and you're going to have a lot of false positives, right? Where, but I hope that one day we will come to the conclusion that it's better to err on the side of caution and have people checked than to have them go out and do what they do. But I think that debate is coming once we get to the point that AI can pick up on things like, the person who's kind of like started spewing, a whole diatribe on social media, and then you kind of go like, that's a little scary. That's almost menacing. Like that person is. I mean, Chris, haven't you ever seen people, and they get in trouble for it a lot of times, but like they start writing underneath a video or like, on the internet or on like Reddit or something, and they're just going a mile a minute, and they start saying things that actually start sounding menacing.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that person should be dead. Oh, that person like doesn't deserve to be alive. They're the scum of the earth, and you start thinking to yourself, if this person went out and did something, you would read this, right? You would say, how did we miss that red flag? And I think that a lot of these people talk about cloaking yourself in darkness. They know that that the internet is this kind of cesspool, and they can hide in it using fake names. They're very hard to find. You can't like figure out who these people are to sue them or locate them or whatever. So they just say these horrible, horrible things. And what you also get with a lot of these trolls and people like that, Chris, is people who have that quality very similar to a lot of these offenders, where they're feeling kind of small and left out, and they enjoy kind of like being an armchair genius that mocks you and ridicules you and whatever, and they love that they're behind the curtain. But I would bet you that if you could pull that curtain away, these would be some of the most pathetic human beings that you have ever seen. Like I think you'd feel sorry for them.
Yeah,
and I mean, just like, because that, can you imagine being so envious, so jealous, right? So jealous of other people's happiness with each other, that you have nothing better to do than to be the person who has to like drop the turd at the party and ruin it for everybody, right? So you get that thing of like everyone's having a good time on the the video, and then you have to like make a nasty comment like that. Like, what is that about? And I mention that because I think that the kernel of that is very similar to, it's just a less exaggerated form of that same hostility toward other people that are happy or that make you feel like an outsider or like you're not the smartest person. And so that's why, you know, I have to tell you, I'm a really big believer in being like very inclusive of people, because you never know how people take being left out. Some people think that that justifies being violent. So I, you know, I try very hard to be very, very inclusive. I think people are right when they say that. Yes.
Yeah, no, and I agree. I think, you know, these types of opinions here, people get it. And what's really interesting is the fact that they'll go to depths and the level of creating multiple avatars and then, you know, create the fire, right? They come into these, you know, conversations, they light the fire, and then they respond with the multiple advertisers to keep throwing kindle onto the fire as if, you know, as if nobody has figured it out. But, you know, ultimately, you know, I agree with you. I can't, they are some lonely individuals. But let's get back to Elliot real fast, because he
Well,
was.
I think it answers that question that the person had earlier about social media.
Yeah.
The Rodger type is loving
That girl.
the social media world, because in the social media world, you have an echo chamber in which a person who is this big, feels this big, can be on full blast. I mean, you know that if Elliot Rodger were alive today, he would have a social media platform where other people who agreed with him would be talking to him and interacting with him, and he would be on full blast about misogyny and this, that, and the other thing. And in a weird way, he'd have a community of people who all felt the same way. And I mean, he was trying to do that with the videos.
Well, how many people adored him after all the crimes?
Well, that's again with a lot of these guys. I mean, every one of the people we discussed today, you know, there's one of two things happens. Either there's a split where some people will say, I can't imagine they ever did that because I thought they were fascinating. You know, you saw that with Polito. A lot of people thought he was just a lot of fun, lovely, whatever, really bright. So there's that fragmentation, or it's more like people just kind of say like, you know, this is exactly the kind of guy that I expected to do this because he was always such a jerk. He was always so arrogant. He was always so whatever. But I think that the loneliness is the kernel. And I think social media becomes a way of casting a very large net. Look at this. Look at this group that's listening to us right now, right? Thousands of people listen.
Yep.
And we make jokes and we're having a conversation. And in the intimacy of this conversation,
which is the best audience in the world, by the way.
What happened?
Which is the best audience of the world. I love these.
They're fantastic.
Yeah.
And we've got this audience and they're feeling included and they're commenting and they're talking, and it feels like we're all friends and they come every week, right? We all know each other. So that's the best of social media. Social media can make people feel connected and create a community, and it can be healing. I really believe that there are people who feel that these conversations are very healing. They learn about the things that scare them. They have a place to come every week where they feel that their ideas matter and they contribute. They learn to be a little less judgmental of the person next to them because they don't know what's going on with them, right? They start to kind of understand about mental health. Maybe they think about their own abuse and how they might want to get treatment or help someone, you know, get someone out of an unsafe situation or themselves, look for red flags. So I think that's the best of it. But the worst of it is that we could be sitting here whipping this audience up into a frenzy with lies and hatred. You can get them on like the level of their amygdala. You know, we certainly see this in the political environment right now. You whip people up. And you have to be very careful with that, because if you have a large enough group of people that are afraid, they can do anything. They become an army. And, you know, so the whole idea is you want to get people on like a higher cortical level, not an amygdala level. You don't want to make people afraid of a boogeyman, or they're going to get upset. They get whipped up. And and you get a group think, you know. So but what I think we have going on here is really represents the best of social media. And I think somebody like Rodger would have perverted it. Don't you, Chris?
Yeah, no, I just love your analogy of that, because, you know, the world, we have enough of that just in the world events going on around it. There's so much there's so many challenges in the world today. And then, one of the goals that we had, and you're a huge part of this, is, let's create a place where it's safe for people, safe for victims. As you know, I'm a big time victim advocate kind of guy, and it comes from my work as well as my own personal experiences. But we wanted this place, Karen and I, and when we put it all together, and by the way, we took a lot of heat in the very beginning, 3 years ago, but that's in the past. But it was those individuals that you just described that came in and just stirred the pot, and then just, kept kicking the lies and all this other stuff. And, I just said to myself, you know what? The Lord knows my heart. He knows who I am. I have nothing to prove to anybody. Stay the course. And my youngest, Dylan, he's like, Dad, just ignore them. Just don't even read their stuff. Just let it go. It took me a while to do that, but now that, we're here, and every once in a while, a few pop up, but oh well, that's their problem. This is New Year's, and we're going to talk about Elliot here in a second. I'm going to finish this one little piece here.
Of course, we are talking about Elliot because it's the
true.
theme. The theme is the person who feels left out, and it isn't enough to be bummed out about it. That they have to become, they have to level the playing field in their mind and go out in a blaze, and you must notice them, no matter what it takes. And the tragedy of that case, Chris, is that this is a guy who didn't like the idea that he was just like one in the crowd that didn't stand out. And then he went out and literally targeted strangers, random people, so that he turned against them their own randomness. Right? That's the whole idea. So you get punished for your randomness, because that's what I'm just a random guy who doesn't stand out. So now your randomness could lead to your own death. And that's the clue to what it took to level the playing field in his mind, right? That you're going to be the nobody. Of course, paradoxically, he gave those victims a kind of a permanence in the in the dome of heaven, right? Because we all know who they are, and their names are forever elevated because they're people who suffered for no reason, and and their names were in the papers, and we remember them. I hope.
This is really the first time I've ever heard the analysis connection or relationship to what's happening with the power of social media as a whole. I mean, some of these kids are being pushed into taking their own life, and
yes.
I mean, it's just horrible. Are you seeing patients where what kind of intervention type of
cyberbullying, you mean?
Yes.
Well, it's terrible. Cyberbullying is easy. It's complicated because with somebody like Rodger, cyberbullying would go an extra step, which is that he would perceive as bullying that which was nothing more than a neutral post. Right. So like what Rodger would do is if he were looking at like Instagram or something, he would see people loving each other and hugging each other, and he would see it as a slight. So it would feel like he was being picked on, but he was reading that into sort of a paranoid flavor to it, right? Where you're reading into something that isn't there. But for the average person, the cyberbullying means that somebody is going out of their way to reference you in remarks or in what they're posting. And it could be absolutely, totally brutal for the individual, because it makes you feel publicly shamed, humiliated. I mean, I've heard of stories of things like people filming something and then putting it on the internet. There's a case that we write about in The New Evil, an infamous case that was in the media, where a guy who grew up in a very religious home had a clandestine gay lifestyle. He was humiliated of his gay lifestyle, and someone filmed him having an encounter with a male, put it on the internet. The family found out that he was a gay man, and he killed himself. And the question arose, was that tantamount to murder? In a way it is, because it's a way of driving a person psychologically to try to kill themselves. For those who are fans of literature, as I am, you remember that in the story Rebecca, the De Mornay story Rebecca, there's a character, Mrs. Danvers, who tries to get Rebecca to throw herself out of a window to defenestrate herself. That's what you call that. by constantly whispering in her ear, "You're not good enough. You're not as good as the master's first wife. You know, you should just throw yourself down into the ocean. Why don't you kill yourself?" And then she nearly, you know, she seriously contemplates it. So if you have someone in your ear like that, and then you do something, did they kill you? Did they manipulate your will? Right?
Mhm.
So, you know, and I think it takes a deeply manipulative and psychopathic person to do that. But it was like a little mini Charles Manson, right? That kind of toys with you that way. But cyberbullying cases are some of the ugliest represent some of the ugliest of what I call new evil, right? Because it couldn't happen until recently. It's a new type of evil that technology has given birth to.
Does any of your research to date show a correlation to some of the things that have hit? I know you're still constantly evolving. And by the way, it's kind of funny, guys, when I'm talking to the audience here, where Dr. Brucato has 119 years worth of data, and it's kind of funny when we start talking, and he starts pulling up my old murders. And I mean, it's like,
Hey, listen, they were very public, Chris.
I know, but I remember when it first started happening, I was like, holy cow, what don't you have in there? And it's really fascinating. But do you think in our society today, as prevalent and as powerful as social media is, the guys like this, Elliot, are we creating many Elliots, or what's going on?
You're getting to a question that is right at the heart of the new evil, the second half of the new evil, right? So the first half of the book is the scale.
Right.
Second half of the book asks about, it really poses the question, how are cultural changes and changes in technology giving birth to new crimes that simply could not have happened in the years prior?
Right.
Or are crimes getting worse and being played out in more dramatic ways? And then there are indirect ways that technology plays a part. For example, as like DNA technology gets better and stops people from committing crimes, they're doing more mutilating and burning of bodies to try to get rid of all the remnants so that they don't get caught, right? It's like, Michael Stone, I think, making an accidental pun, used to call the arms race, where you do more dismembering and mutilating arms race, right? Because you're outpacing the DNA technology, right? And so that the whole idea is you look, there's this fascinating interplay. And I think of Rodger in many ways as like the quintessential postmodern killer. So what do I mean by postmodern? Well, the word modern, we all know that word, but what does it mean? The word modern had to do with modes. A mode is like a school of thought. It gives you identity, you follow all the rules of it, and that's your identity. I am Christian, I am Jewish, I am Buddhist, I am Hindu, I am male, I am female, And what has happened in the postmodern world is there are no more modes. So since there's no more mode, you can dabble, you can take anything you want from any of those. So you can say, I identify as Christian in the sense that I celebrate Christian and Easter, but I also like to borrow some of the ideas of reincarnation that come out of Hinduism, and I like to do transcendental meditation, and I'm also interested in the Buddhist principles of, mindfulness, and I'm also, so that you kind of dabble. It's postmodern. Not criticizing that. I'm simply saying it's cultural. And the reason it's interesting is because what happens in the postmodern world is that a healthy person can handle that. But an unhealthy person with a brittle character structure has a very hard time not knowing where they belong. They need a mode. And if they don't have a mode, the one thing that gives them an identity being taken from them is going to make them pop. Their girlfriend, their boyfriend, their job, their school, whatever. So you can only have that happen in a postmodern world. It's a postmodern phenomenon, and that's why the mass killings are really coming one after the other. They're really happening, especially the shootings, in that postmodern time, that zeitgeist. Because then what happens is you get an identity by you wind up on Wikipedia because you've committed a mass shooting. So you've now compensated for the fact that you lost your entire identity when you lost your job, right? That's what happened to Tony Polito. Tony Polito will be in the encyclopedia, became somebody by finding an identity through murder because he lost his first identity. So it's a postmodern construct. And if you get that, you understand that Elliot Rodger is the classic modern killer. Narcissistic, thinking that nothing matters except your looks and money, thinking that your identity is defined by how many hot women you get with, expressing anger through entitlement and wanting everything to be televised, to the best degree possible, writing endlessly because you think people are going to read your writings and learn from them and be fascinated by you. This is all new evil. It's a new type of killing, right? A new phenomenon. The mass killings that happened in the pre-New Evil era of the pre-1960s, they were very rare. And when they happened, they were over interpersonal conflicts. Like a person is jealous because their wife leaves them and they go to school and shoot the guy, or go to work and shoot the guy cheating with the wife, and accidentally shoot the guy sitting at the desk, or shoot him because he's a witness. And that's the end of it. You didn't have this expression of nihilism and need for attention that you get in the modern crime. So I think of so many of the crimes that we see today as really being impossible in prior eras. And Rodger is like the textbook example of it. I mean, Michael Stone and I always used to talk about that. Elliot Rodger was like the embodiment of new evil.
Can it get, well, with the avatars and all this other stuff with the VR and all that's coming, and we've had a couple of conversations like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in the metaverse, where people are creating their own universe, their own worlds, etc., and there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in those environments. I mean,
right. But the facts don't matter. It's that the people are groping for an identity. The whole idea is that if you go into a group and somebody in an authoritative way writes something in the group, you just take it as a fact. And then what you do is you give your loyalty to that identity, and now you're in an echo chamber where information from the outside means nothing. And then what happens is, literally, we know from fMRI studies, when people who have differences in schools of thought talk to each other, instead of changing each other, they're just strengthening the synaptic connections that in their own brain. That they're just believing what they believe more, and not convincing you of anything. This is certainly at the heart of a lot of what is going on in the political sphere and etc. But it's this echo chamber, and then everything that is said by somebody outside the circle has to be completely dismissed as untrue, when the truth, of course, is in the middle. And the most beautiful thing about Americans is that for all of our history, as much as we bicker, we compromise. We're losing our ability to compromise, which is very key to the American spirit and the heart of things like the multiple branches of government. And we're losing that. And so because it's all about, my identity is better than your identity, which is essentially tribalism.
Yeah. And Adam here says, what's the difference between an identity and a mode?
So a mode is a cultural, religious, or political school of thought from which a person adopts an identity. So a person who struggles to have an identity alone is going to basically adopt the school of thought's identity. And we all know people like this. They have no identity apart from whatever that thing is that they believe. But then there are other people that they can tolerate the murkiness because their identity is like a hodgepodge of, it's a farrago of traits, and they're content with it. They can tolerate that. But if you're scared, you're going to go for groupthink. And the other danger of groupthink, going all the way back to primitive times, is that when you're scared and you attach yourself to the tribe, you need a psychopath. You need a psychopath that leads the group and kills for you and lies for you. And you don't even care that they're terrible because they're being terrible to protect you. And that is why some people become attracted to psychopaths, or we've seen psychopaths all throughout history become kings and leaders, because we think that psychopaths are keeping us safe when we don't realize that they don't care about us. So, and that is also why some people who are in legitimate leadership can sometimes go haywire. And you could see people in the church go wrong, or people in politics go wrong, or people that are our teachers and why it hurts so much when we're groomed or that kind of figure cheats us. So I think that it starts getting into really fascinating stuff when you start asking the question, is the culture producing Elliot Rodgers? Yes, it is.
Interesting.
It is. And I think the audience is getting it. I think they really get what we're saying here. We're not getting pushback, or I think they get it. It's cultural. That's why it doesn't happen equally in every country. If it were a biological phenomenon, if it were mental illness, it would happen everywhere at the same rate, and it would happen all across history at the same rate. Instead, it all starts coming after the 1960s, especially since the 90s, with this mass shooting stuff. And it's really only here and a smattering of European countries, and you could count in a couple of hands the ones that are outside, with a lot of blade mass murders in China and things like that. But it's an American phenomenon. So I think we have to ask some really uncomfortable questions. Could you have had an Elliot Rodger in another country at another time?
Yeah, I don't know.
But I think it's deeply fascinating. And I think that is the reason that when you go into the world and you include, when you love people, when you're kind to them and you don't put them in categories, you have no idea what you could be doing by doing that. We are at a point now where the statistics are almost such that every one of us knows someone who has been affected by a mass shooting. Think about that. It doesn't shock me, Chris, that your son was affected by a mass shooting. It doesn't shock me that someone very dear to me survived a mass shooting. It doesn't shock me that we're now at the point in the statistics where there are 2 people who were in one infamous mass shooting, changed schools and went to other states, and were in another mass shooting.
Wow.
That has happened to 2 people now. That doesn't shock me. That doesn't shock me at all. So I think we're getting to that point now where the frequency is getting to be such that we're kind of starting to know someone who knows someone. I certainly knew people affected by the mass murder of 9/11.
So that is a great point. So I'm going to ask a question.
Yeah.
Let's do a quick poll here with everybody listening. We've got almost 2,000 people watching us tonight on Note.
Oh, so that's pretty good for a New Year's audience.
Yeah, for a New Year's audience. This is beautiful. We love you guys. Thank you for being here.
Loyalty.
Hopefully we're giving you some things to think about. So anyway, here's the question, everybody. To Dr. Brucato's point, how many of you just say yes, okay, or no? Do you know somebody that has been either affected by a mass shooting and or what was the other point?
Right. No, that was it. That most of us at this point,
yeah,
like indirectly, we could say that happened in the school I went to. That was somebody that I know. That was in my neighborhood. That happened in my own backyard. It's a phenomenon now that's getting so common. It's not that weird. If it turns out that most of the people in this audience have not been affected, I would be pretty shocked. But it's possible.
Here they come. Here comes the yeses. Look at this. Yeah. At church. Oh my goodness, at church.
Sure. Oh, there's a lot of. Thank God, there's a lot of no's. But what makes me sad is I don't know if there's going to be so many no's soon.
Wow.
So let's see. So for the people who say yes, what did they experience? Which one?
Yeah.
Look at that. The person from D's Creative Hands Crochet. 4 people in Maine. They were affected. They knew, apparently.
San Bernardino, Mandalay Bay.
Oh God, that was horrible.
Oh.
See how many yeses, Chris? It's disturbing.
Yeah. And look, at Ireland says no. Well, you would expect that.
Ireland.
Yeah.
Although in Ireland you had political mass murders like bombings and things during the Troubles and things like that, but not this thing where it's happening in peacetime with ordinary people. Oh, somebody affected by Vegas.
I'm trying to figure out how I do a poll, guys. I don't know how to.
Their mother works at the mall where there was a recent mass shooting. Somebody said they were affected by the Walmart shooting in New Mexico. See, Chris, how many?
Yeah, no, I'm watching it. I'm trying to figure out how to do a poll. I don't think.
Somebody here was affected by one in the 70s, which is very rare.
Allen, Texas.
Somebody was affected by Fort Hood.
Yeah, Canada.
Amazing.
No, I'm in Canada. Okay.
You see, Chris?
Colorado, yeah, no, you're to your point. To your
Yeah,
exactly. That's just
and the ones that say no, a lot of them are not in the United States.
Bend, Oregon, at my grocery store. Wow.
Yeah.
I remember that one. That was the kid that walked in there. He was kind of not wrapped
so
around.
It's so
Uvalde. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, the Pittsburgh synagogue. See?
Yeah. Here's a question, Doctor. What about countries like Canada, which is influenced now by American culture as British in our past? Why do we not have the rate of modern mass shootings every year per capita as the U.S.?
Well, look, I don't want to get into a controversial topic, but it has a lot to do with the ease with which Americans acquire firearms. That's why I am convinced that is why in my own research, it's a predictor of being mentally ill when you use something other than a gun. Because I think the point is you get flagged and can't get one. So you use a knife or a car or whatever. In other words, I think it has to do with that. Now, I know that's very controversial. I don't want to get into a conversation about that because there's constitutional provisions and things like that, and people are entitled to their ideas, and I don't believe in, in preaching about that. But I will simply say that the studies clearly suggest that there's a relationship between, the ease. Do you know that in the Nashville shooting, the Hale shooting with the transgender individual,
yes,
they were one of the ways they were able to get firearms was to use the other identity. The use of the other identity caused them not to get red flagged despite a mental health history, and that's very interesting to me. So you want to kind of think about that, about how people, if they're clever, can get around the law, to get around the rules or slip through the cracks. And so you want to think about that too. But I want to be very clear. I don't want to go down into that, talking about gun control and all that, because it's very controversial. But the fact is, in countries where they ban them, they stop having those. I mean, it's very clear. I mean, there are countries that had one mass shooting with an assault weapon, they banned them, and then they don't have any more. I mean, it's like, that's just the way it is. There was a drop in the number of mass shootings involving semi-automatic weapons and weapons that have been altered to be fully automatic when we had a ban in the U.S. briefly. The statistics are clear, but you take those facts and you do what you want with them. And also, one of the things that we were looking at, but we sort of never published it, was if there's a relationship between the state in which the offenses take place and the leniency of gun laws. But good luck getting it published. So it gets too political, but it's very, very.
And just so everybody knows, for the record, I carry a gun. So
what telltale signs of parents need to look
for? We're not going to get
into it. May act on a violent impulse. Well, it's Kimmy, Micro Kimmy again. Yeah. I know Kimmy. She's a friend of mine. This is very complicated, because what is going to happen if you ask the average person who doesn't have a lot of familiarity with this mass violence, they're going to tell you to look for signs of mental illness, because they're going to make the mistake of thinking that most of these people are deeply disturbed in a psychotic way or whatever. That's a smattering of them. What you're really looking for, according to our data, is previous legal history, drug and alcohol use, right? The average age for a mass shooting, a mass violence event, is about 37. So it's not related to adolescence or anything like that, which is when most serious mental illnesses begin. So the fact that the average age is 37 is a giveaway that it's not related to those mental illnesses, really, unless the people are not medicated or using drugs or whatever. And then you have this other factor, which is the precipitating factor, right? The precipitating factor. So what is the event that makes the individual feel hopeless? That's what you're paying attention to. So if you have a kid in school who's using drugs, has previously been in trouble with the law, and is now talking about, like, there's no reason to be alive anymore because I got rejected by the basketball team and I'm getting bullied, and then they start writing in a notebook or whatever violent things, that person has a lot of the red flags that you want to bring to the attention of a guidance counselor or whatever. The trouble with that is that you need the guidance counselor or whoever to know what they're doing, because a lot of them are going to make a judgment call and they're going to say, they're just being an adolescent. I'll have a therapy session with them. They'll be fine, whatever. The person goes in there and lies. Right? Oh, fine. I don't know what they're talking about. So that because they don't understand that they're dealing with somebody who's got a personality structure where they can hide that stuff if they want to, So, but I think that those signs, drug and alcohol use, the precipitating factor, for previous legal history, and of course, when it comes to firearm ownership or access, the truth is what you worry about more is suicide. The statistics tell us that ownership of a firearm is much more associated with suicide than going out. And so that the idea is if a person gets despondent and there's this idea that they could just go into the safe, get the gun, and rapidly end their problems, that's a very tempting thing to do to people that are in a suicidal place. So a lot of literature says we worry more about suicide with gun ownership than we worry about mass violence.
So was Rodger Elliot bullied in school?
Very badly, yeah. In fact, there was this one really terrible thing that they used to do to him where they would tape his head to his desk. He'd be like in a position where his ear was against the desk and they would like duct tape or whatever his head to it so that he couldn't move it. It's a very, very humiliating. Yes, I agree. It's about responsibility. And but they would like tape his head to the. I mean, that's terrible, right? Not an excuse, but it's terrible. And there is a tendency to minimize the abuses that a lot of these guys have experienced in their lifetimes. They don't get these ideas from nowhere. But yes, he was certainly picked on and abused. But
so I'm going to play Doc the other piece of his
oh God, yeah,
video. If everybody's enjoying this, could you hit that thumbs up button for us? And if you've not subscribed, can you hit the subscribe button for me? That really helps out the channel, and we'd be grateful for that. Okay, trigger warning. Thank you very much, Teresa. And don't we have the best mods?
Really do. How is Miss Sophia?
She's still pretty sick,
oh.
But her husband is very optimistic, and she's making great progress day by day.
That makes me happy.
Yeah,
we need her.
We do, absolutely. Okay,
give her a big show of support here, or what? Because she sees it, right?
Yeah, she sees it. I think she's, doing better. I want to be, sensitive to her private health issues here. Okay, here we go. You ready?
Another entry in my collection of vlogs. Today I want to talk about the kind of men that girls are attracted to. You see, ever since I hit puberty, I've wanted girls, I've desired girls, I've been sexually attracted to girls, but they've never shown any attraction back to me. And during that time, I've tried to question why. Why aren't they attracted to me? Even though during the last 2 years I've tried really hard to appear as attractive as possible and to be as attractive as possible.
I mean,
he means physically, and with the trappings of wealth. He doesn't understand that attractive means your personality. I mean, anybody older than like teenage years, I hope, has gotten the hint that what makes a person attractive is a lot more than their looks. I mean, that's an idea that matters when you're like in mating mode, when you're like, but then at some point you're like, oh, I might actually want to have children and a future and a marriage or a relationship with a person who's nice to me and is interesting company and is funny and loyal, right? So that's like, I don't know, some people just can't move past the idea that people pick their love interest based only on like hotness or whatever this phrase is he's using all the time. I think that's a deeply juvenile concept. I mean, come on.
And his whole written manifesto was predicated off of, this verbal manifesto as well, right?
Yeah. Right. And you know, his actual writing, I mean, they're really, really horrifying, Chris. I mean, I think we also have to pause and point out that whether it's serial killing, most of which is committed by sexually perverse men, and or mass killings by people like this, you have to admit that nobody seems to bear the brunt of all this aggression more than women. And it being a woman in the contemporary world with that or even the ancient world, with that constant threat of predation and entitlement and reduction to being a body and an object and everything else, is so hideous and so awful. I mean, I guess the reason that I don't understand it is because, you know, I came from a culture and a family in which the women were, like, you know, revered. You know, I mean, I had a mother and a grandmother that were, like, you know, the best people in the world. I admired them. This notion of thinking of a woman like subjugated or less or threatening or is so warped. And I think we have to just pause and think, like, it's not a coincidence that the audience of most true crime is women. They're disproportionately affected by this stuff. You know what I mean? And think about
85% of my audience. 85%.
All right, disproportionately affected. And then you think about that a woman could just be walking down the street and some guy could roll down the window and hit on her because she's pretty, or he finds she's pretty, and now he wants to objectify her, and he says, "Oh, you want to go out sometime or whatever?" And she says, "No, you know, I'm not interested," or whatever. And then he has to call her a derogatory name and drive off, you know, 80 miles per hour in a testosterone explosion because she's become symbolic of all women that reject. You know, it's like that sort of stuff is so constant. You know, and even sometimes, Chris, it's benevolent. Like the guy, it's like a benevolent sexism, like the guy who thinks he's going to be the hero that, like, you know, is going to take care of you or whatever. I just heard a story today from yesterday from someone in my life who was driving her car and her mirror got clipped. And a man who came across as very kind said, "You stay here. Don't worry. Don't cry. I'm going to go get tape and we're going to fix your mirror." So he fixes the mirror. And immediately upon finishing fixing the mirror, he says, "So we're going to go out? We're going to go out sometime?" Like a total entitlement. Like in other words, I did this benevolent thing for you. You want to go out? So I think we have to pause and kind of understand that that's another really serious problem in our culture, is that there are men that are angry at the freedoms that women have achieved and want to take us in a time machine back to the days of subjugation. And they feel that way about race too. They want to kind of get back to that because that's when there were modes, but some of them were ugly. Some of the modes were ugly. And, you know, you can't romanticize them. So I think I would bet that's another thing. If you polled the audience, how many women in the audience have been catcalled, assaulted, had some entitled guy expect something, be too pushy or inappropriate, you know, tell them to F off, you know, because the person's not, you know, etc., or even done worse. I think the statistics would horrify you at the frequency. So misogyny is like epidemic. And again, you know, Elliot Rodger is like the epitome of the postmodern misogynistic entitled, you know, guy.
I think once the internet showed up in 93, 95,
yeah,
all bets were off. And you know, it's just out of control. So this is your question here, because I can't even pronounce the doggone word.
You know. Oh, Oedipus. Well, the quick answer to that, and I hope we're not being, you know, too didactic, and it looks like people are interested. So, but everyone knows, I mean, who's ever studied Freud, you know, this idea of the Oedipus complex. It's based on, you know, the famous play where, you know, Oedipus Rex, and, you know, and of course I make puns about that when I talk about Rex Heuermann, who I call Oedipus Rex. But with Oedipus Rex, the whole idea is you have a guy who is fated to kill his father and marry his mother, and he winds up doing so accidentally, and then uses pins to take out his eyes to punish himself for having relations with his mother and marrying her without realizing that it was his mother. So Freud had this idea that when males are born into a family, that they have such an attachment to their mother that they experience a kind of a competition with the father figure for her, and a desire for the father to kind of be destroyed and for the mother figure to kind of be with them only, and which can manifest in a really perverse kind of sexual way in certain people who don't resolve that. And so the Oedipal theme that you see with Rodger is that ultimately the mother rejection theme is, first of all, he doesn't wind up with the first mother, right? He winds up with the stepmother, and he hates her guts. And so there's a longing for acceptance that he's not getting, right? And there's this idea of, if I could only be as good as my brother, she would love me. If I could only be as good as dad, she would love me, right? So that from the beginning, there's that Oedipal theme of the women don't like me as much as man X in this triangle because I don't have factor X, right? So now I need to compensate for it, and then ultimately, this guy fails at it, and so he goes out and he destroys because he can't achieve it. So I think that the funny thing about some of these people, and some people out in the world, is they're dating or they're interested in dating, and they think that their problem has to do with romance and sex and whatever. But it's really an unresolved thing that goes back to before puberty. There's nothing to do with sex. It has to do with just looking for like a stable object. If you don't resolve that and you go into puberty and you're dating, you're basically dating people and playing out stuff from when you were a little kid. You have no business dating, but you think you're doing it in a sexual way, but you really resolve. And that's why I always joke with people that first dates are like, it's like two, if you could like see the word bubbles like a cartoon, it's like two people go on the date and the guy says, okay, we're going to make an agreement. I'm going to play out all of my psychological stuff from before I was in puberty, and I'm going to project all of that onto you. And in our arguments and in our sex life and in our happy times, I'm going to play all of that stuff out and hope to resolve it. And then the woman says, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing. And they make an agreement, and then they literally enact. They just play out the whole thing like a script. And they don't understand that they're doing it. It's totally unconscious. But with some people, it's much more dangerous because they're enacting a script that didn't work the first time, that they never resolved. But if it works out, if you had a healthy childhood, you can enact something good, right? So, but anyway, it is amazing how people do that and they have no awareness of it. And if they think about it, they start to notice it, that they do that, and in therapy, people, there's always that aha moment where the person starts to realize that their patterns are rooted in this childhood stuff. And I think that was true for Rodger and everybody else we're going to talk about.
Interesting. Fascinating. Okay, this
is everybody got their head spinning yet or what?
Yeah, they're all spinning. And it's always fascinating because here's one of the questions that I put up here. Do you have any theories on Jack the Ripper on this New Year's Eve?
Yeah, I do. I think that John Douglas was 100% right, that the person who committed the Jack the Ripper case was the Polish immigrant that had been recently institutionalized. And what's really interesting is that they recently found one of the great etc. granddaughters of one of the women killed, and she was in possession of an article of clothing that was like taken from one of the victims, like had been like handed along with it, and it apparently had DNA on it that they think that they've linked to that man.
Interesting.
And so that but I pretty much think that he is the offender, because the person who committed the Jack the Ripper case is, again, remember that when we think of a sexually sadistic serial killer, you're thinking of a post-1960s killer.
Yeah.
The serial killers before that, they were either very, very, very disturbed, or they were like lonely hearts killers or elimination killers that had a practical goal. So Jack the Ripper, there's a sexual element, but he is a ripper. He is a disorganized guy where you have like total butchery of the body as an expression of rage or sexual, tension. And so if you look at those crime scenes, they get worse and worse and worse and worse until there's just sheer butchery. And so everyone, with the profiling background has always said Jack the Ripper was a very mentally ill person. This is probably somebody who had spent time in an institution. And then they actually went and looked at the logs, and they eliminated people who you know, it couldn't be them because they were in the institution when the murders happened. You wind up with a very small number of people, and one of them happens to be the guy that has long been on the list of suspects. And then there's a DNA link that has now come up. And Douglas has said it all along that he was the only one who had the proper profile. I think he was right. But I think there's fun in that will never really solve the Jack the Ripper case, because it's the quintessential British, you know, fog, you know, creeping through the city with the guy in the tall Victorian hat, you know, who lures, you know, it's the classic story, right? And so I think that we don't really want it solved. Sort of like Zodiac. I think there are certain cases we don't want solved because we think that they're stories. We forget they're real. And
so this question here,
he'd be a 22 because he engaged in pretty intricate torture. You have to remember that Dahmer is another person that people speculate was on the spectrum, but you know, take that as you will. But Dahmer was a serial killer whose motivation was to render his partners permanent, because everybody was always leaving him. So for him, there was the idea that if you eat a person, you render them permanent, part of you forever. But then there was also this idea that he could make them permanent by making them into zombies. So he would lure a man, generally an African-American man, home from a gay bar, and then he would drug the man and drill holes in the cranium and put like steaming water, boiling water, and other things in the head, with this idea that he was going to turn them into zombies. He would photograph them, another way of making them permanent. And the idea was that one day when they were gone, he was going to arrange their skeletons to look like the acolytes in a church, and he was going to have an altar with their skulls on it, and it would be like they were permanently praising him forever. And by the way, what do we think of when we think of an altar? The Eucharist, and the idea of eating something and having it become part of us and whatever. So that's a theme that was very big for Dahmer. And but he was a 22 because what he was doing to these people constituted torture. There was a prolongation of the death of the individual for his fantasy. So he has to be a 22. Once you torture more than one person and kill more than one person, you have to be a 22. You want me to answer about Papa Rodger?
Absolutely.
Well,
by the way, that most recent one, he came into the chat. That was created in March. That account. So,
right. But Kohlberger has a iPad right in the trail. Right?
He could have access to the internet. Yes, absolutely. That is possible. We don't know that. We don't have any confirmation of that.
Well, it was a reactivation of the same profile, or did somebody
know.
copy what was on the first profile to make it look reactivated? Because I could see somebody doing that who's trying to exonerate him. Because remember, you've got this whole world of people obsessed with him.
Yeah.
I mean, we deal with them here, right? Whole world of people with this fixation on exonerating him and whatever, or in love with him. And so this idea of poking holes in the narrative, making it look like, you know, there's no link to Papa Rodger, and if there's no link there, all the other links people have come up with could be BS. I don't know if he's Papa Rodger, but if he is, isn't it interesting that the name would be Rodger, spelled the same way as Elliot Rodger, with such similar traits? You know, Papa Rodger suggesting that Elliot Rodger was like the father, you know, and I'm the son. Right.
You know, that is an interesting insight. I don't know if anybody has made that connection.
I don't know.
I've not heard it. Even just the
spell. They're asking about it, so they've thought about it or heard it somewhere. But I think that the whole idea is like, you know, if it is him, it is interesting, the notion that, you know, calling somebody Papa Rodger. I mean, there's the implication of like venerating a father figure, Rodger, right? And so I think that's intriguing.
Okay,
people have wondered about it. I mean, because there is a whole incel theory about the Idaho murders. That's some people speculate that that's the motive.
So, Kimmy, the main theory, was that the main theory originally, that
the incel theory?
Yeah.
I mean, people have you have to remember, the truth is we don't really know. We have no idea what the motive was. I've come up with a few different potential ideas, But one thing I know, Ann Burgess, very big fan of the notion that whoever committed Idaho might have been an incel. Other people feel that that's, overblown, that, whatever. But I think that certainly, Kohlberger, if he is guilty, there are a lot of stories about him attempting to connect to women and doing it in ways that were just not working. But that, again, you have that classic thing of like, it's the woman's fault. It's not me. I'm not the weird one, And remember the birthing hips comment,
Yeah, that was that was interesting.
creepy. I mean, it implies like that's all the woman's for, that's the point, but I think it is interesting to think about if the Rodger thing is a coincidence, because even if somebody is not Kohlberger, is just posting that stuff, why did they pick the name Papa Rodger? So it's intriguing. Yeah, it's an incel theory, right? Exactly.
That is that in of itself, that comment in of itself. Yeah, why would they choose that name?
I suppose identification. I think identification. That's the whole idea. You know what I found fascinating, Chris? I think I sent it to you. I found absolutely fascinating that somebody sent me a newspaper clipping from the Daily News from the time that they executed Bundy. That was written by Kohlberger's mother, or at least somebody with her name, Marianne Kohlberger, decrying the fact that people were glad to see Bundy dead, that they were cheering the limo, the hearse, cheering the hearse.
Right.
Isn't that interesting that Kohlberger's mother may have published that, and then there's been speculation all along that Kohlberger might have been influenced by Bundy?
Yeah, she wrote that in an opinion piece.
But isn't that fascinating?
I think it is. Yeah. I mean, there's got to be a correlation. I mean, I can't wait to see some of the information that's going to come down here. To be honest with you, I'm still, reeling from the house that the house is gone, because
I know.
I just think that's, anyway, I'm not going to go down that road because we hit it a couple of times this week.
But it's going to be interesting. And I think that I think there's something intriguing about that idea, that because it suggests a loving, sympathetic figure who would see goodness even in a person, that there was human dignity, even if a person did terrible things, that there was human dignity in them. And that's very interesting, because everybody has always wondered about the black box of how was Kohlberger treated at home. And that's really interesting, right?
Yeah. And to this question, Jennifer, if it is Ellie, they're going to get hammered by the defense. I'm not going to go out that far yet, that if it is, the defense is going to eat them up. I still am fascinated by how the defense is playing this. And by the way, we're just chit-chatting now on New Year's Eve, everybody, and we're grateful that you're here.
I think it's been a really fascinating
conversation. Absolutely. 1,000%. And we've even got Muddy Paws here is going to shift gears here with us. A little lane change. But what do you think of the MH370 pilot with the most plausible theory that it was suicide and used a plane to conduct it? You mean where he went down purposely and took everybody with him? That one?
Hold on, I'm trying to see in my record here. This is the person talking. I think they're talking about the Malaysia flight, right?
Yeah, right.
Well, I think the point is it's impossible to tell. I mean, we don't know, but there have been other mass murders by pilots where, remember the famous incident, Lufthansa, where you had a very depressed guy who basically just killed everybody on the plane as a way of killing himself. I mean, couldn't care less about the value of these people because he didn't care about the value of himself, right? So that you have this kind of thing. But it's possible, but there's no way to know. I mean, the whole point is that the plane vanished, and with it the whole story of what really went on. I think it's going to be fascinating if we ever can find out, but I think we just don't know. This point that was made there about about the terabytes of information that are going to come out on the Koberger case.
Yeah, 51 terabytes.
Pretty interesting. I mean, you know that if somebody has a rich fantasy world with sexual undertones, their electronic footprint is going to be pretty interesting. I want to see if there are photos of one or more of the victims. I want to know if there were photos taken while they were dying. I want to, you know, on the cell phone. I want to know if there's odd porn. You know, if any of it has themes that are similar to the kind of fetishistic stuff we've been talking about, voyeurism, exhibitionism, you know, etc., violence. You know, I want to know if there are manifesto-like prolific writings that are there that will give us clues to motive. But I think the electronic stuff is going to be really important, don't you, Chris?
Absolutely, and I think it's going to be in today's digital age with his advanced skill set, evident of the fact that he applied for a job at a law enforcement agency to teach them about digital footprints, etc. I am going to be surprised, or I won't be surprised if there's video data, you know, at some point. Everybody's into, it's as if the world is a total stage, right? Everybody's into carrying cameras and, you know, getting everything. I mean, do you see it, putting it past him to videotape, you know, some of the stuff post the homicide?
I wouldn't put it past them. I recently did it. Well, not recently, about a year ago, I wrote a chapter on the subject, which I hope I'm going to include in the new book, about people who film or photograph their offenses. Because remember that with this mastermind kind of personality, you do see yourself as a kind of director. And the idea is that the fantasy is constructed and you want to preserve it. Most of these offenders keep it here and can revisit it mentally, but some of them want to actually be able to relive it. One of the things I say in that chapter is that, and I was able to confirm with Vernon Gayberth, of all people, that this is accurate, is that I figured out independently of him, and we came to the same conclusion, that the very first serial killer to use photography in his crimes was Harvey Glotman in the 1950s. And so I talked to Vernon about it at the time. So why would that be? Why would photography, which is around since 1837, not be used for about 120 years in serial killers? It was very simple, because it took widely available Polaroids to become available so that you had privacy with what you photographed.
Right.
Before, you would need to take it to somebody to develop it, or and they would see. So once privacy, this again gets to the new evil idea about technology. Once Polaroids were available, so the same thing. Now that you have camcorders, cell phones, VCRs in the 80s, right, and all these things that let you, in the privacy of your own home, watch what you film. A lot of serial killers and offenders started using it, and there are also mass murderers that live stream their offenses or take images of their. So it's a kind of a way of.
Who are the two guys up in the Bay Area? I forgot. Ing. Was it Ing?
They're talking about Ed Gein. Well, actually, correctly pronounced Ed Gein, but
no, not him. But up in the Bay Area, that was photographing their victims.
There are a lot of them. In what era?
It was in the mid 80s, 90s.
You talking about Victor? What was his name? He had a Greek name. I wrote about.
He had the cabin, right? He ran the hotel with the two gals, but he had a Asian name.
Oh wait, do you mean Lake and Ing?
Yes, that's who I'm talking about.
Yes, Lake and Ing were filming their murders. Yeah, to watch. Yes,
Okay.
Ing is still with us, and Lake killed himself. I mean, he was the control freak of the two. And but yes, they filmed it. But this person's asking about a totally different case. I mean, I'll answer it, but it's not related to anything we've been. They're talking about Ed Gein, the serial killer who created a woman's suit by disappearing bodies, and it wasn't really the father. Yes. Well, if you really want me to answer that, I will. The character of Buffalo Bill, who was created with the assistance of John Douglas, right, by Thomas Harris, was a conglomeration of serial killers, right? So that, for example, the use of a cast to pretend that he couldn't lift things, so a woman would get in the truck and he could punch her and then drive her away. That's taken from Ted Bundy. The idea of keeping a woman in a pit is taken from Gary Heidnik. The idea of making a woman's suit is taken from Ed Gein, right? So the idea is it's a hodgepodge of serial killers that were put, a composite put together into this one offender. And I could go on about other serial killers that are in there in that mix. But the point is, with Ed Gein was a schizophrenic man who lost his mother, who was very abusive and kind of constantly told him that she was Lutheran, very hyper religious, really, and she was always telling him that all women couldn't be trusted and they were terrible and whores and whatever words she would use. He should only trust mama, And there was also an Oedipal thing there, because it's believed that he attempted to kill his brother, we thought his mother loved more, by setting fire that would consume the brother, and to try to get mom's attention. But what wound up happening was she died, and he couldn't tolerate it. He walled up, basically closed off the area where she was. And instead of doing what all of us do and taking somebody who died and making them part of ourselves emotionally, he literally wanted to become her. So he would dig women up in the cemetery and sew their skin together and make a body.
Great.
It was very psychotic, and he would go out in the moonlight and dance and talk in her voice. It was the inspiration for both the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and the movie Psycho, which of course has the famous line.
Yeah, somebody got it. Kelly got it. How about this Paul Bernardo guy? Do you know? Are you familiar with
everything about him? Yeah, of course. What about him? What do they want to know? He was the Canadian serial killer who paired up with Karla Homolka, sexually perverse. Got her to commit horrendous crimes with him, including torturing to death her own sister. But they were like a very nice looking couple, and so they used to call them, the Ken and Barbie killers. Because they were very picturesque and looked like exactly the kind of people you would go out looking for to have a relationship with. But he was a cunning psychopath. She herself had psychopathic features, people say, but she was like sucked right into his charms. And he's still incarcerated. She recently got out, so I'm be careful what I say.
Do you see any correlation if the New York situation? Do you think with the wife? Hiraman?
Oh, well, what you're talking about is that if Heuermann's wife is potentially involved, we have no idea. There's speculation about that. I think the jury is out on what went on there, if anything. But what you're touching on is couples that commit these offenses together. Can I have dinner with Dr. Gary? Okay, as long as you don't ask to have Dr. Gary for dinner. This is another.
That's hysterical. Hang on a minute. Hang on, I got to get the horn. Happy New Year, Catwoman. Did you hear that? As long as he is not the dinner. Oh my gosh, that's hysterical.
Well, it's the Sounds of the Lambs reference.
I don't care who you are.
Remember in the Sounds of the Lambs? I'm having an old friend for dinner.
We're back in 1,000.
They're all cracking up, but this is the twisted humor that you.
Absolutely.
Right.
That was okay. That was good. So now I got to get back up here to the questions. Okay, the theory here.
Nice John T.
That's funny. That was great, Cal, and thank you so much for throwing that up there. Do either of you have a theory as to why so many serial operate in California? I live in New England.
Very simple. There's a very simple answer. According to the serial killer database at Florida Gulf Coast and Radford, which is run by Dr. Leary, Tim Leary, who I hope we're going to have on sometime soon, Chris. We talked about that.
Yes, yeah.
That massive database told us that the most common state in which to be victimized by a serial killer is California, and the least likely to be victimized by a serial killer is South Dakota. And the reason for that is very simple: population. The higher the population of a state, the more likely it is that you're going to be victimized by a serial killer. So if you don't want to be killed by a serial killer, go to a low population state and nothing will ever happen to you. Go live in the Badlands or the North Dakota or something, or in South Dakota, and nothing will happen to you. That's the whole idea. It has to do with population.
Trisha's like, no.
Yeah, right.
I know, right? Oh, thank you for this, Poppy. Let's see here. What's for dinner?
God help us.
Okay, let's see
All
here.
of the things people are saying is so funny.
Okay.
So why? Let me see what that's when Wyoming is the least dense population. It's an interesting question because Wyoming has had some very interesting, offenders. I don't know, but I'm telling you, it's clearly related to population. There's got to be a factor I'm unaware of why it is like that. Wyoming wouldn't be the one that's the lowest. There has to be a reason. It's probably, if you looked at the statistics, and I could ask Terry, I would bet you that it's because of like one or two offenses that just like make it slightly above. You only need one or two to be above zero, and you're not going to be the lowest. So
are you familiar with all the bodies that are appearing in the Austin area? There've been
that's something that actually Kimmy had asked me about recently. I am familiar with that. That's an interesting case, but I think again, that this gets to this whole question of like, is the case linkage appropriate? Chris, that's something I think you really could talk about, is problems with incorrect case linkage or linkage blindness in an investigation that can really affect a serial killing case. Wouldn't you say? I mean, that's right up your alley.
What happens obviously is when these things start happening in clusters, okay, and we call that a cluster homicide, right, where you start seeing multiples appear, and where investigators make mistakes is they get this tunnel vision that, well, this one's a knife, that one's a gun, this is drugs, etc. And so what the public doesn't understand sometimes is the volume of information coming in so quickly. When you get to a homicide scene, on average, you are making about 365 decisions within the first hour.
Right.
And they can't be wrong because you'll get burned as time goes on. So where investigators get bogged down is they're coming in, these cases start to come in so rapidly, and they run out of the bandwidth to immediately say, hey, wait a minute, we got to look at this. So that's where programs like VICAP, Violent Information Criminal Apprehension Program, come in, because then they can take all of the 10 filters of profiling, like, victimology, et cetera, and all that information can be punched in there. The thing I find interesting about the Austin cases is there seems to be a water connection to all of them, and that may, trigger some really other additional insight in relationship to why these bodies would be appearing in the water. I mean, because you get to that place, and more than anybody, Doc, because your intentions there is to destroy any type of evidence by disposing a victim into a body of water.
Chris, what you're touching on gets right to the heart of this question I was just asked on News Nation.
Mm-hmm.
Why are serial killers declining? Why are there fewer of them? And everybody says, well, it must be that the technology has gotten so good that it's catching these people. But I think it may be that these people are getting more clever at how to eliminate what you need to catch them, or they are getting better at eliminating the linkage that would let you know that two offenses are committed. But because people like us, I mean, we're out in the world telling people this stuff, and there are people studying it and learning how people who do what we do think.
Mm-hmm.
And then they learn how to get around it. I mean, don't you think that's true?
Oh, 100%. And I think they're watching us, but it's no secret to them, the information that we talk about.
They're going to find it somewhere.
Yeah, they're going to find it.
But they know pretty sophisticated things now. I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, look at the serial killer Israel Keys. He figured things out like, if I put my cell phone in a potato chip bag, the material of the potato chip bag is made out of will keep it from being picked up.
Yep.
You know, as I travel across the country. I mean, really, really amazing stuff they come up with. And they didn't figure out that those cases were connected until actually he shared in his confession that a lot of them were. There were killings in, killing in Vermont and, in Alaska and whatever. I mean, he was purposely going out of his way. So, and he, again, you have a very postmodern killer because he became a master of learning how to get away with everything. Right. Yep. So, yeah, that's true.
But these kind of crimes like this, when Tiff, these are the kind of crimes that you get towards like cartel. Whenever there's, the type of weapon like a machete, for an example, this is really that type of weapon. You start looking outside of, your normal dope channels. If there's a series of machete crimes out there, then what they're going to start doing is looking at the victimology in relationship to, what's the history, kind of like the two, kids that are killed, recently, the pregnant girl and the boyfriend. I mean, you start diving into him and immediately you start recognizing, okay, there's a lot more to this story in San Antonio, for an example, that's just on the surface here. 2 gunshots to the head. Those are very personal. Machetes are very personal. It depends on where they hit them. If the first strikes are at the, up here in the upper body, then that's a very personal problem. And so you start looking for people within that circle. And I had cases years ago in Southern California when the refugees had originally come over from the 70s to the United States from Vietnam, when Vietnam fell. Well, they set up shop up in Orange County. And there were cases up there in Westminster and, Santa Ana, where they were taking, decapitating people. And there was one case, there was a 7-Eleven, and they put 3 of these decapitated heads on a post outside of a 7-Eleven store.
Dear Lord.
Yes, it was horrible, but it was all related to, some problems, turf problems, and other things that were starting to develop inside of that community.
Well, Chris, Anne and Victor Petrecka and I, when we were studying dismemberment mutilation, we came up with a category that we called communication dismemberment or communication mutilation. And it's usually used by gangs. And the idea is that you do something to give a warning to another group, like don't mess with us or this is going to happen to you. And sometimes it's very symbolic, like somebody who snitched gets the tongue cut out or something like that, so that it's, or the emasculation with castration or whatever. So that the idea is to kind of say to another group, this is your warning. I mean, primitive people, primitive tribal times in our history, people used to do things like that. Yeah. One tribe would warn another tribe, don't mess with us, because like the bones of our enemies were used to create the throne that our leader is sitting on, or we've made a pole out of body parts here. It was a way of warning, and even in medieval times when they would torture someone to death, they would do it very publicly and they would leave the body out for the birds, because the idea was like, it was to deter people. The same thing's going to happen to you. Right. But the trouble is that in our modern culture, particularly with gangs, people in peacetime, for non-political reasons, not related to being heads of state or in a judicial situation, are doing things like they only used to do in history against people that were being executed or tortured. Now the average citizen thinks he's like a little medieval torturer, who could do these things in their home. But gangs, I think, are the most vicious with dismemberment mutilation.
Absolutely. MS-13, right, Doc?
Oh, it's unbelievable. You ever see the ones who carry the machete in the pants leg?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Horrible.
Yeah. I mean, Jeff, remember I had Jeff on here, Jeff Wood here, who's an expert on those guys. Yeah. And he has undercover video with a guy with the machete in his legs, going down his legs, and it's kind of like, wow.
When the bouncer won't let him into the club, so
right,
yeah,
and he came back with the machete, and that that's again we talk about that piece of it. So how many want to keep us here?
No, I don't think that's doable. But
Oh my
we
gosh!
all got loved
What
ones.
what time is it where you are?
10:52 p.m.
Okay, yeah.
I don't think we could pull that off. Everybody would be full asleep. Would be a good cure for insomnia. But I think that it's been really interesting. I love that we're getting a chance to answer random questions.
Yeah.
And I really liked the little survey where we realized how many people were affected by mass violence. I thought that was amazing.
Here's one. This is yours.
Well, this is I never understood what to make of. I actually am aware of this work. If I think I am aware of this work. And it's complicated because for cultural reasons, who knows if it's socially constructed, if it has to do with testosterone, who knows. Historically, women just didn't commit the kinds of offenses that men did, particularly serial killing with sexual motivations, things like that. The studies say that men tend to kill strangers, to go out and hunt. Women tend to kill intimates, and people they know. When women are serial killers, it's more that they repeatedly kill their own children, or they're operating as nurses or physicians and they're killing the people they're taking care of. It's Munchausen's thing. They tend to use poisons, whereas men tend to use other weapons, guns, knives. There's very big differences between males and biological females, and how they kill. And consequently, women just didn't tend to commit the kinds of crimes men did historically, and as a consequence, they didn't get the same sentences. But what I think is that in our modern time, the most amazing thing is that you're starting to see females who could commit offenses that you used to think only males committed. So you're actually starting to see things like sexually perverse serial killer females. It's like, there are, for example, Michael Stone and I used to think about how many serial killers were there who were female before the 1960s. And we could come up with less than one hand worth, right? The two most famous being Elspeth Báthory, the Hungarian countess that would torture young women to death to bathe in their blood because she thought that it was keeping her young. So that was a very old case, and also it was kind of political because she was a countess. And then the other is Jane Toppin, who was a woman who would give poisons to men so that they would shake to death, and she would experience sexual arousal hugging the men as they shook to death. But that's about it. I mean, there's a few more. And, so that there is definitely a cultural phenomenon. So I think to ask a question like, are the sentences different? Well, the crimes were completely different that they committed. And so, but there are some very interesting, particularly in the last century, in the beginning of the last century, there were some very interesting female killers that would like knock off a bunch of men for money, and elimination murderers and things like that. And then you start, as time goes on, you wind up with the Eileen Wuornos types, that there are a few of them. But the interesting thing about them is that they tended to be women who were victimized by men who were serial killing as a kind of an expression of revenge against the men who had hurt them. I worked in a level 4 prison in California.
Thank you, Christy, for your service.
Thank you, Christy. That's really great.
We're so grateful. And all of our nurses, our doctors, our first responders, firefighters, teachers, everybody, this channel is open to each and every one of you. And again, we only ask that you subscribe. And this has been a long one, Gary. I mean,
if they want to ask questions, I'm here.
I've kept you here, and and they're asking us. And thank you, everybody who has gifted memberships to everyone. I mean, you guys are absolutely fantastic. What 2024 is going to do is going to be an amazing year, an absolutely amazing year. And there's just so much coming around the corner. I can feel it. It's going to be fun. I want to know what Dr. Gary does for fun. And they also, you got to answer the other question. Were you a big Alfred Hitchcock fan back in the day?
I love Hitchcock. I could do, talk for many hours about the symbolism and the themes in Hitchcock. And by the way, don't try watching Hitchcock without understanding Oedipal. ideas were very big for him. But what do I do for fun? I mean, I'm a pianist. I paint. I write. I love museums. I love trying new foods. I love, I really like to embrace life, in a very big way. I have quite a number of things that I collect that I'm very interested in. I'm a huge film buff. I mean, I have quite a number of things that keep me amused in life. I happen to have a very good memory for this stuff that I write about and that I study. But you'd be amazed that this is going in a box. Like when when I'm not on a show like this, I'm interested in talking about the rest of life.
What drew you to crime?
Yeah. That's actually a very complicated question. I think the answer is probably that I got interested in it when I was studying the concept of evil in seminary. I had felt called to the priesthood, and I was in seminary for years, and then I was learning about theological ideas about evil. And then when I decided instead to become a psychologist, to do a lot of what I could have done as a priest, to work with populations like incarcerated people and people with severe mental illness, I started to learn that a lot of what we call evil, has overlap with a lot of mental health concerns and personality disorder and all that. So I got fascinated with it. By the way, am I the only one that's amused that the date when you write it out is right now is 123 Did you notice that?
I did notice that.
12/31/23. 12/31/23 is 123 I think that's hilarious. Did you
I
know?
didn't notice it.
Anybody else notice that? I think that's fun. but it's 123
They've noticed you have a great memory, though.
Yes, yeah. But it is. It's 123. So, but I think I think what people are really asking by asking a question like that is, how could you be aware of so much darkness and still have a life, like, and enjoy your life and all that? And I think it has to do with being balanced. If someone asked about Hitchcock, how do Hitchcock movies always seem to end? They toy with the idea of balance. I was just watching Rear Window. Rear Window ends with Jimmy Stewart falling off a ladder. I was watching, which one is it? Vertigo. How does that end? With a nun opening up a trap door and a woman losing her balance and falling off a roof. It's symbolic of the balancing act of good and evil. And the idea being that if you lose your balance, any one of us could go into the darkness, right? And so I think that it's a balancing act, and the truth is, those of us who are into this, we have lives outside of this work. We love life, and that's the whole point. It's a contrast, don't you say, Chris? I mean, you don't walk around and talk about true crime all day.
No, and I will tell everybody what you are listening to and what you see with Dr. Brucato is what you get. He is like this on and off this show. I mean, that he's a fascinating, as you can tell, he's a fascinating human being. But on the other side, with as much as he has seen and many others, I would put myself in the category that he has a love for life. I have a love for life because I think we have seen what the human spirit is capable of doing in its worst hour. And, it's really, somebody asked me recently, about how we could sit with these kind of people. In my case, obviously from an investigative aspect, catching them and, then putting them into the environment where you have to get them to tell you why they did what they did, right? I mean, that's what a homicide investigator is supposed to do. And then, of course, you have docs like Dr. Brucato who give you, the train tracks to put your train on that track, and then you follow the understanding of that psychology to get there. But somebody had asked me to get to the point, how do I do it?
Right.
My response has always been, I'm just a conduit to whatever that universe is for that individual. And, you know, for me, obviously it was a religious thing for me, because I always felt that they weren't confessing to me. They were talking, you know, way out of my pay grade. And when they felt, you can actually feel a change in the room when they tell you why they did what they did. And one of the craziest cases I had, it was a robbery at a convenience store, and the clerk, the kid put him in the freezer and he put a shotgun in his mouth. And, you know,
Well, he was already deceased or alive?
He ended his life. Yeah, he ended his life.
Atrocious.
And I had him in the interview room, and we were at that place where he was starting to cry and all this other stuff. And I remember reaching out and putting my hand on his knee, and I leaned into him and I said to him, I said, you know, you're not a bad person. You just made a bad decision tonight. And he looked up at me, and I could see the tears just coming down his face. And then I leaned into him and I said, what did it feel like? And he looked right in my eyes and he said, it was horrible. And I thought to myself, okay, the humanity that I think that God had given me that very moment just released this place where this guy was, whatever that means. And, you know, when he went to prison, years later, I got a letter, and in the letter, he said, thank you for treating me with kindness and respect. I did something horrific, and I deserve what I got.
That's very beautiful, Chris.
Huh?
That's very beautiful.
It was, you know, the humanity side of life. And I've tried to teach, you know, my children, myself, you know, what does that mean? You know, I mean, because you, Gary, I mean, you could tell 1,000 of those stories, I'm sure of it. And, you know, but being in the trenches at the time, and even today, I mean, you know what I do during the day. I don't talk about it, but, you know, I'm still working with people who commit violent crimes. And that's, I think, why we get along so well, and our chemistry is so great, because, you know, what you guys don't know, the audience doesn't know, we laugh and we go, you know, can you believe this? You know, blah, blah, blah. It's like,
but right,
no.
I get a kick out of it. But Chris, remember, you know, because we sometimes talk about theology, remember that in the famous scene in Matthew, when there's Judgment Day and everybody's being divided up like the sheep and the goats, you know, which is my very favorite image from all of the New Testament. I have an image of it hanging to remind me every day, the Hans Memling image of it. Remember, one of the things on the list is, I was in prison and you came to me. And every time I go into a jail, I think of that it's an act of mercy, and it adds up, because remember what the point is of that story is that what you're really doing is you're doing that to Christ in that story, right? So you go into a prison. Now imagine Christ identifying with a serial killer, a murderer, or a person who's committed SA. But he's essentially saying is, by seeing humanity in that person, you're seeing the me in them that's underneath all that garbage, right? That, well, it's like a marble that has like caked mud on it. But if you like could wash it off and get to its original innocence, it would be this beautiful thing, you know? And so I try to remember that. I really do. I mean, every time I walk into a hospital, I help a person on the street or whatever, I think of that like a checklist, so that one day, you know, on the last day, I could say, you know, when did I do that for you? Right. And but I really think it's important. And I think we have to remember that there is an act of mercy in doing that. I mean, you know, a person who doesn't deserve one drop of the world's love, but you still see the humanity in them. And I think it takes a special person, don't you, Chris? I mean, it's not for everybody.
Well, it's a gift that was given to me, you know, from a higher source. I've always believed that. I mean, if you watch my interview with Brandon Wilson, you know, I didn't treat him as, you know, the horrible things that he did, knowing that he did it. And after it was over, he just kind of, you know, relived it. And, you know, I've never actually had you analyze that of him, of watching him. I know you know Brandon Wilson, but I never asked you about, you know, how he's.
Yeah.
I mean, man, he's just one of them.
That Checky murder. Oh my God! I mean, Chris, you didn't see the crime scene, did you?
Oh yeah.
Oh my God!
I have all the photos.
You mean in the bathroom with the?
I was the first one.
Oh my God!
I was the case agent. So I remember vividly walking into that. When I got there, because Karen and I were in Balboa Park at the time. We were walking in Balboa Park when my pager went off. And I called in, you know, and my boss was like, "Hey, you need to get up here. We've got a little boy that's been, you know, killed in the bathroom." And I'm like, "Oh boy."
And not just killed, Chris.
No, I know he was
killed in a manner that was like beyond imaginable. I don't think that the audience even needs to hear that. I mean, it's too it's too gross, you know.
Right. I wouldn't do that to Mom.
Yeah.
Her name is Sharon.
Yeah,
I would never do that to her.
Beyond, I know the case very well.
Yeah, when I got up there, you know, we were standing outside, and at the time I was the senior guy, and you know, my skipper said, "Hey, you know, you're a case agent. What do you want to do here?" And I made some decisions, you know, quickly. And if anybody wants to see what Brandon Wilson did, I have a video up of him doing it, you know, demonstrating it on me. Long story short, and without getting into details, I remember walking in because I was the only guy going to go in at that point. We'd had enough people. We had the family. We had about 15 family members had gone into that bathroom to try to do something. And long story short, I walk in. I was, you know, there were a couple of coppers that were there. One guy from LAPD, one guy from LA Sheriff, who had shut the scene down before any of our guys got there. And I remember walking in, and you know, the whole thing was real time, right? And I was like, I looked down, Matthew's there, and I looked over and I looked at the walls and I did some math, and I come out and I go out and I sit there. And my boss says to me, he goes, he said, "What do we have?" And I said two things. I said, "It's a mess. It's a mess. And number two, nothing." And he goes, "What do you mean, nothing?" I said, we may have some transfer on one of the side walls when the suspect was exiting the building, but we didn't have anything else other than that. And there was a lot of information that we held back. And for the audience, it's called hold back. That information that only a suspect would have known in relationship to wound patterns, that type of stuff inside and that, of course, paid off big dividends. Ultimately, when Brandon was captured up in Hollywood at LAPD West Hollywood, where he was arrested. And here is how the universe is on schedule. I don't know,
Chris.
I know, but he went and he tried to kill another lady, got off the plane. Yeah. But here's a funny story out of a crazy, horrendous thing. And this is, we all have to always have a little humor, right? So I'm in the office, my phone rings, or the secretary calls me back, says, hey, we got LAPD on the line, and they want to talk to you. They may have a guy. I said, okay, you know, send them back. So my phone rings. I pick up the phone. McDonough. I hear, yeah, McDonough. I said, yeah, McDonough. He goes, McDonough. I said, who the heck is this? Right? He goes, Mike McDonough, LAPD. Who's this? I'm like, holy cow, your last name is McDonough? I said, that's my last name. So Mike McDonough and a guy named John Thung had him up there, and the rest is history. But yeah, that was a crazy time. And if anybody wants to see it, you can go see the interview. It was pretty interesting. But there was a whole plan on getting him to that stage, and Dr. Park Dietz played a key role in that situation.
Yeah, very well known. Yeah. Well, Chris, I think you don't talk enough about some of these capers, that you've been part of, because some of them are really very prominent. I mean, You were involved in Jean Benet Ramsey case. You were involved in Wesley Allen Dodd case. I mean, for God's sake, I mean, talk about an infamous serial killer, a monster, right? I mean, but I mean, that's a major case. I mean, there were a lot of them, and you were even involved in a case that people think might be linked to Zodiac.
A couple weekends. I've learned enough that I learned here on YouTube that if you start saying things, they're like, yeah, whatever, and they hammer you. And so I just thought, you know what? It's not worth it. It's not worth it. And I mean, the Garcia case, that one was bad. That was bad.
You've had some pretty bad ones, Chris. I think you've seen, I mean, I think the point of this whole thing is that we were really getting to the question of, how do you stay so happy and peaceful having seen things like that? But I think it's very much like the way nurses and doctors see horrendous things, and they get through it thinking, I'm doing this to heal this person. I have to look at all this gore and blood and whatever, because like they're going to be okay because of it. And that's what I tell myself, like when, like, for example, Cold Case Foundation gets together and we're looking at crime scene photos, or I'm being consulted on a case and there's like absolutely horrendous stuff in front of me. I mean, that's what I try to remember, that, I'm looking at this to get to the healing. I mean, don't you feel that way, Chris? I mean, it's like the only way to deal with it.
Yeah. And I don't know if I'm weird, and you can tell me this part of my personality. It's all I know. I've got now, I started in 1982, and you understand my story. I mean, it started with my son and me chasing the car down. And next thing you know, I'm in the police academy with my TAC officer, the guy named Frank Bruckner, who I love to this day. Shout out to Frank in Caldwell, Idaho. He was a infantry officer in the Marine Corps, returned, vet from Vietnam. Amazing human being. But I can remember, standing in line with everybody else, and all these TAC officers are going down line screaming at everybody. And they got to me. And at that time, I was like 180 pounds, just a twig. Yeah. And he looks at me, and then he looks down. Now, mind you, I was raised by two Marines, my mother and my father. So I thought I was pretty squared away, right? And he looks at me, and he looks down at my shoes, and he looks back up at me. He looks at my name, and he goes, McDonough. I said, yes, sir. Yes, sir. He goes, did you shine those shoes with a Hershey bar today? I said, sir, no, sir. He says, take a hike. And he made me run, right? I was like the worst runner. And next thing you know, I'm running around. They called it the grinder. Okay. And we just ran. So that's all I knew. I mean, I got into this business not anticipating at some point that I would be going into homicide. But, when I got transferred, it was like, okay, I can do this. I can figure this out.
But Chris, it gets right back to the point we were making earlier. You have an identity. You have a mode. You have a structure. And it gives meaning to what you do. Jung used to say that madness was running out of meanings. Remember that animals, for example, that don't have language in the way we do, also don't have madness like we have. You can't be a schizophrenic crow or a schizophrenic cow, even though they have brains. They can't, because those are disorders of meaning. That's the whole thing. It's about misinterpreting stimuli and experiences, right? So that what happens with meaning making is it can save you or it can drive you mad. And it's unique to humans. That's why, in my therapy practice, lions don't come in, crying that their female partner cheated on them, or, bumblebees don't come in, going through an existential crisis. They just operate on instinct. It's this weird thing that's unique to us to have meaning. And as a consequence of humans having meaning, we're the only ones that can be cruel. Because we're as Dostoevsky said, that that a tiger can't nail a person up by his ears, and he wouldn't even if he could. Only a human would do that. A tiger would just kill you quickly, So that's the thing you wanna understand, is that meaning making is very central to mental health. And I think that in order to compartmentalize and take a terrible thing that happened to you and turn it into a positive meaning and feel that you have a role in the world and a mission and something to do, that's what healthy people do. And I think what happens to less healthy people that benefit hopefully from therapy is they can't make meaning out of what happened to them, and they despair. And that's what you see in a lot of these offenders, is that inability to make a meaning, to carve out a meaning. So instead of saying a terrible thing happened to me, so I'm going to go out and help people so that they don't experience it like you do, like I might do. What some of these people do is they say, I got cheated, so why should you have it?
Like an Elliot.
Like an Elliot, right.
And a BK.
Right. Well, if he's guilty.
Yeah, if he's guilty.
So that's the whole thing. It this whole conversation, I love when I always thought that a good conversation is characterized by going in a circle, right? A conversation should come back to the original point, and you've learned something, you've meditated on it, right? And you've arrived at and I think that the essence of the conversation is that if you really want to understand mass murderers and people who write manifestos and all that, and you also want to understand why some people can do these horrible things and still be happy, it comes down to the same thing: meaning making, and that's how you get through life. I think that's what I do in therapy with people. I help them make a meaning out of what's happened to them, so that they can ennoble their experiences, and then take it out of themselves and project it into the world and help the world. That's the whole thing. Anyway, well, I think we've covered a lot of ground. It's the new year in some places already.
You know what?
So the viewers in Australia, Happy New Year,
Well, I'm going to let you, as always, have the last word. And I just want to.
What else there is to say? But
I love him. But before while he thinks, okay, I'm going to give him a little moment here to think. I just want to let everybody know from the bottom of our heart, Karen and I, and Dylan, of course, Buddy, here and of course, our friends, and colleagues in the Cold Case Foundation, Dr. Brucato, Dr. Burgess, Dr. Ramsland, they're all Dr. Pacheco, Pacheco, they're all just amazing human beings. We also have, Greg, Dean, and 135 to 155 other people that make up that foundation. If you get a chance, and if you're ever looking for a 501c3 to donate, go over to their website, click on the link, because what you're doing is supporting the efforts of these experts to help these families. This is a very family-centered, victim-centered platform here on the interview room. I am so grateful to my sweetheart, my lovely wife, Karen. I married so far up I can't see straight sometimes, and she is such a level set for me. When we build a house, meaning in theory, she is always the foundation first, and I love her more than anything. And so going into 24, I want you guys to know how much we love you as well, and how important it is to continue to be kind to one another. The world's getting interesting, and I think 24 is going to be a great year, but I also think potentially it has some opportunity to be challenging. And it's up to us as individuals to treat our neighbors, with respect, right? Where it's just the Lord says, love thy neighbor as thyself. We have to treat ourselves correctly first. And when we do that, then we have the capacity even further to love those around us. There's enough hate, there's enough war, there's enough everything out there that is opposition to treating people with love and kindness. I hope to be a better person in 2024. That my New Year's resolution is to be a better person in 2024. And I really hope that your New Year resolution that you make for you will continue to make you a better person, because you are a good person, whoever you are out there in YouTube land and the universe. You are good people. You just put up with us for 3 hours and 19 minutes, and we're grateful for that. And then my final thought process is for our mods. Each and every one of you this year has given us your time. And sometimes it's that time that you squeeze away from your families. Maui Girl, Mimi J2, Sophia, and Teresa. We are so grateful and so thankful to each and every one of you in this 2024 coming up, and in the 2023 you just gave us. Thank you for everything. We cannot do it without you, and I just want you guys to know how valued you are. You are what makes this channel great. And maybe I don't say it enough, but I wanted to make sure I said it tonight. So with each and every one of you, after Dr. Brucato gives us our closing words of wisdom, I'm going to have a segment one day. I'm going to piece all of his words of wisdom together, and then we'll put it together. But God bless you. See you next year.
Well, hard act to follow. First of all, I want to echo a lot of what Chris is saying, everything Chris is saying about, I have felt very welcomed by all of you. You know, I'm yabbering on, as somebody put it the other day, in I think Australian slang, yabbering on all the time. And you guys listen and make me feel that the insights are valuable and that it's worthwhile to keep coming on, and it helps you make sense out of a lot of things. And so that means a lot to me. It helps give meaning to my own existence and my days, that there is value in that, and it's very validating and comforting and nice. So I really appreciate that. I really do. What I would say tonight is, I agree with Chris that 2024 has the potential to be very frightening. But I think it's important to remember that it's times like this, and I don't think we've had a time of adversity like this since probably the Second World War, maybe the Vietnam era. But in this incredible epoch of frightening stuff, this is when what you believe and who you are as a person actually matters. This is the dividing of people into sheep and goats. I'm grateful that out of these difficult times, we can't just be all talk. You're going to start to see the people who have good in their hearts and love other people and so forth. They have to actually go out now and be the peacemakers and be the helpers and be the kind ones and the ones with insight. And the ones who have darker hearts will reveal themselves. Those lines are being drawn. And I think it's important to understand that the kindness and the love that you're going to need to show is going to be on a small scale. Most of us are not going to be in a position of doing that through a megaphone. It's going to be that there's one person or one thing that you love, and you do it with your whole heart. And by doing that, you're sending out a kind of ripple effect into the world. But try to think about it that way, that this challenging time we're in is actually giving us a chance to show that what we believe really matters to us. And one of the things that I think gets right to the heart of the whole conversation today is that what our culture has forgotten is that what you believe and the ideas that you subscribe to that underlie your particular values really define your identity. And without them, you're sort of a amorphous human being that is just wandering around like a shade through the world. You need a clear sense of what you believe. The great theologian and probable future Catholic saint, Fulton Sheen, used to tell a joke, and like all good jokes, it had an almost mystical truth to it, hidden behind it, in its double meaning. And the joke was that a man goes to a dentist with a terrible abscess, and the dentist says, "I must operate immediately or you could die. But before I do the surgery, I have to ask you, what is your particular religious and philosophical belief system?" And the man, in terrible pain, says, "Why does that matter? Why do I have..." And the man says, well, technically speaking, if I don't know your religious and philosophical school of thought, I don't really know that you're going to pay the bill. Well, what that joke gets to is the notion that there are a lot of assumptions we make about the basically moral things people are going to do. But they have those ideas because of their particular philosophical, spiritual, moral ideas. And that philosophy that underlies all of us really matters. And so you have to ask yourself, what is the philosophy that underlies me? And if your philosophy doesn't have a place in it where at the end of the day you love your neighbor as you love yourself, there's something wrong with your philosophy. You are dictating the philosophy to suit your own human, animal desire to kind of act out, protect yourself, etc., instead of understanding that love is about self-denial. And also remember that love is not possible unless there's injustice. Injustice in the sense that love is about one person giving more than he or she gets. So instead of being mad at injustice, you should say, injustice gives me an opportunity to be the more loving one. As Auden said, if equal affection cannot be, let the more loving one be me. And there's nothing wrong with that position. I think it's the best position a person could take. Because at the end of your life, all anyone's going to remember is who it is that you loved. That's it. Not the things Elliot Rodger thought were important. Anyway, take care, everyone, and have a wonderful new year. And I hope you'll think about some of the things we talked about, because I think we got right to the heart of a lot of what is sick about our culture. Take care. Bye-bye.
Hard working every day, I'm stressed out 24/7, babe. No timeouts, wish we could fly away. You and I go to our favorite place. Oh yeah, make special memories together. I'll be your company now and forever. I say we fly away, you and me, go to our favorite place. Feeling the sun on my face in Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. I need a summer breeze, some fresh air to put my mind at ease. No cares. You wanna come with me? Me and you go to our favorite tree. Are you ready now? We jump on a plane now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. Don't hesitate now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. We'll never come down. We're going away. Yeah, we're going away. You and me. Feeling the sun on my face in a while.